"Where are you now?" I asked as I watched a baseball game with my brother. That's when my certainty about my husband's lies solidified. His brother wasn't in any condition to watch a baseball game right now. Once I realized all of this, I resolved to take revenge on my husband. I found unlikely allies for this. "My name is Sarah. I'm 27 years old, a nurse at a university hospital. All jobs are tough, but being a nurse means dealing with people's lives. While I don't directly intervene as a doctor would, the everyday support and minor treatments I perform come with a weight of responsibility not much different. When I was in elementary school, I had to be hospitalized due to an illness. Despite being young, I felt a lot of anxiety, crying alone when my parents couldn't visit me due to work. But the nurse who cared for me saved my heart during those times. Sarah, it's okay if you don't hold back when you're feeling lonely. It's definitely going to get better. Let's hang in there a little longer," she'd encourage me every day. Thanks to her, I overcame the hardships of my hospital stay. After being discharged, I admired her and decided to become a nurse. I studied hard to achieve my dream, and now it's been 5 years since I've become a nurse. The job is certainly challenging, but every time I see a patient smile, I genuinely feel glad to be doing this work. I'm fortunate to have my current job, and one of the reasons is my husband, Bob, whom I married a year ago. I first met Bob at a party, and once we started talking, we found out we had a lot in common. We hit it off pretty quickly, leading to us dating. After 2 years of dating, he proposed to me. "I love you, Sarah. You put your heart and soul into everything you do. I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he said. "Are you sure? Do you really want to be with me?" I asked. "Why would you even question it? I want to be with you because you're Sarah. So I want you to get married to me," he replied. "Yeah, I want to be with you too, Bob," I said, and we officially tied the knot a year ago. But there's one thing that's been bothering me. He doesn't get along well with his parents. Ideally, we would have wanted to hold our wedding ceremony when we got our marriage license, but he refused. He didn't want to have anything to do with his parents. So when we went to pay a visit to his parents to announce our marriage, it was hard to set a date. We somehow managed to pay a visit, but my husband was in a bad mood the entire time, and we only stayed for 30 minutes. We ended up getting married without having much of a conversation with my in-laws. Of course, I'd like my in-laws to attend our wedding ceremony too. So, I decided to be honest about how I feel. "Bob, can we talk for a moment?" I asked. "What's up?" he replied. "It's about your parents. We also have the ceremony to think about, so I think we should go see them and have a proper discussion," I suggested. My husband let out a deep sigh and responded with an annoyed expression. "Didn't I tell you before that I don't want to talk about my parents? As far as I'm concerned, I don't care if we don't invite anyone to our wedding. But we should at least invite your parents, Bob. That's enough. If you insist on having family members there, we can just ask my brother. Isn't that good enough?" I reasoned. "Well, I'd love to have your brother attend, but you're really persistent, Sarah. This is a matter of my family, so please don't meddle too much," he said with another sigh before leaving the living room. Alone in the room, I slumped on the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling, overwhelmed by a feeling of emptiness. It was such a shame that we were distant from my father-in-law and mother-in-law. They were such nice people. I wanted them to attend the ceremony, but what could I do to make my husband understand? Even after countless attempts, whenever I suggested, "Let's go see your parents," my husband flat out refused. At some point, he would get angry just by mentioning them. One day, my brother-in-law and his wife were coming to visit us at our apartment. We had dinner together once when we reported our marriage, but although they lived in a neighboring city, it was the first time they visited us since our marriage. After 10 o'clock, our apartment buzzer rang. When I opened the door, there stood my brother-in-law, Jake, and his wife, Emily. "Hello, Jake. It's been a while," I greeted. Jake showed a bright smile. "Hey, Sarah. Long time no see. I apologize for dropping by unexpectedly. Hope you don't mind." "Oh, not at all. Bob is waiting inside. Please come in," I replied. "Awesome, thanks." "Well, here I come," said Jake, following me inside. Emily took off her shoes and called out a greeting, but there was no response from her. "Did she not hear me?" wondered Emily. "She didn't talk much last time we met either. I wish we could be better friends." As they enjoyed some casual chatter while having cake, the atmosphere began to lighten. Since they decided to have lunch, I started preparing the meal. As I was getting things ready, my brother-in-law entered the kitchen. "Sarah, I heard from our folks you haven't visited home since you got married, he remarked. Ah, yes. Well, it's Bob, isn't it? He doesn't get along well with Dad, right? I admitted. That's right. I want my in-laws to come to our wedding, but Bob is hesitant, I confessed. Upon hearing my words, my brother-in-law made a troubled face. After pondering a bit, he said apologetically, I'm sorry. Bob's being stubborn. I wish there was something I could do about it. I'm sorry to cause you trouble, brother-in-law. No, I'm the one who should apologize for not being able to do anything. I'll try to talk to Bob about it indirectly. Really? Thank you. That would be a great help. Meanwhile, my husband and sister-in-law were having fun playing mobile games. Despite my worries, they seemed to be enjoying themselves. I started to feel frustrated with my husband. Just as my brother-in-law and his wife were about to leave, my husband spoke up in a stern voice. Hey, what's up? Did you say something to my brother? Why do you ask? When we were weaving, my brother said you should think about Sarah and confront our parents. You were chatting with him while making lunch, right? You stirred up something unnecessary, didn't you? With a look I'd never seen before, my husband glared at me. Silenced by the awkwardness, I was unable to respond before he continued. You know, isn't it unfair to talk to my brother about our parents, knowing that I don't want to be involved with them? No, I didn't mean. I'm turned off. I'm not feeling like doing the wedding anymore. What? I started, but he clicked his tongue loudly and left the house. He didn't come back until the next day. Since that day, my relationship with Bob has been strained. Our conversations dwindled to the bare minimum, and the once light-hearted atmosphere was gone. Then my husband's absences began to increase gradually, especially on holidays. He was almost never home. Suspicion crept in as he started going out more often. Gathering my courage, I decided to confront him. Hey, you've been going out a lot on your days off recently. Where do you go? I asked. Does it matter? Do I need to report everything to you? He replied sharply. What's with that tone? Do you have a reason you can't tell me? I pressed, half-jokingly. His eyebrows shot up at my question. Flustered, he stammered. I've been going to my parents' house. Parents' house? Bob's, I clarified, surprised. Really? I mean, with the wedding coming up, Sarah wanted my parents to join us, remember? He explained hastily. Well, yeah, but if that's the case, shouldn't I go too? I inquired. No, it's fine. My parents would feel uncomfortable with Sarah around anyway. That's the situation, so don't worry about it. He ended the conversation almost forcefully, leaving no room for my input. After that, he continued to visit his parents' house on his days off. I expressed my desire to accompany him, but he never agreed. Then, one day while I was at work in the hospital, a familiar patient was brought in on an emergency basis. What? Brother-in-law? I exclaimed, recognizing him. Even when I called out to him, his response was sluggish and his body temperature was high. He was also having mild convulsions. According to the doctor, it was probably heat stroke. I quickly tried to call his wife, but there was no answer, just continued ringing. I was sure his wife was a homemaker, so why wasn't she picking up the phone, especially when my brother-in-law was in such a condition? What should I do? But panicking won't help. I decided to switch gears and call my husband. However, like my brother-in-law's wife, he didn't pick up the phone. My husband should be at his parents' house today, so I decided to try calling their house. Since our marriage, I haven't been able to meet or even properly talk with my in-laws. They might not think highly of me, but I can't care about that right now. When I dialed the landline of their house, after a few rings, my mother-in-law picked up the phone. This is Sarah. I apologize for not being in touch for so long, mother-in-law. Oh, Sarah, it's been a long time. Have you been doing well? Yes, thanks to you. I'm sorry I haven't been able to visit. Don't worry about that. I'm glad to hear you're doing well, Sarah. And is Bob doing well? Yes, he's well. Wait, what? I was taken aback by my mother-in-law's words. My husband should be at his parents' house right now. Confused, I hesitantly asked my mother-in-law, mother-in-law, isn't Bob there now? Bob? I haven't seen him since he introduced you when you got married. What? I thought he's been visiting almost every week. There's no way you know Bob dislikes us, don't you, Sarah? My husband hadn't been going to his parents' house. What does this mean? Wasn't he supposed to go back home to smooth things over with his parents in preparation for the wedding? The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. To confirm the facts, I called Bob again. Of course, he didn't pick up at first, but I kept calling persistently over and over again. After about the 10th call, he finally answered the phone. He spoke in a noticeably irritated tone. "What is it? You keep calling. I'm busy." "Busy? Even though you haven't even been to your parents' house?" "Ha, how do you?" "I just had a chat with my mother-in-law on the phone." "Hey, what's the deal?" "It's not just today. You haven't been visiting your parents' home all this time, right?" Well, that's... Explain it properly. Where are you right now?" As I waited silently for his answer, my husband nonchalantly said, "I'm watching baseball with Jake." "Baseball?" "Yeah, you can hear it, can't you? The cheaters of watching the game. Jake and I are having a blast right now." At that moment, waves of pent-up anger overtook my restraint. Indeed, behind my husband, lively voices could be heard. Judging from the sounds, it seemed true that they were at a baseball game. But that's not the issue. The main issue was that my husband was lying big time. How should I confront him, holding back my anger? I pondered for a moment, then spoke up. "Hey Bob, how long are you going to be on the phone?" Emily, my sister-in-law, whose voice I could recognize through the phone, chimed in. There was no mistaking it since we just met the other day. Realizing that the call had been disconnected and only the busy signal was echoing in my ear, I understood. Everything was a lie. I couldn't forgive this. At this rate, I'll corner him by any means necessary. With a newfound resolve, I headed to Jake's place. Fortunately, his condition had already stabilized and he was sleeping soundly. Just as I was about to leave the room, opening the door, a voice came from behind me. "Sarah?" "Oh, Jake, are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm fine. It was a heat stroke, huh?" I was feeling sluggish, but I was so busy that I didn't have time to hydrate. "Please be careful. I was really surprised when you were brought in." "Ha, sorry. So why are you here, Sarah?" Jake inquired. "Oh, well, actually," I began. I informed Jake that my husband might be with Emily at the moment. Instead of being surprised, Jake smirked. "I see you've noticed, Sarah." "By the way you're saying it, Jake, did you know about this all along?" I asked. "Yeah, well, I found out about a month ago, and I just started gathering evidence. But I've got more than enough evidence now, so don't worry," Jake reassured me. "I see. I'm sorry. I didn't know anything," Jake admitted. "No, it's okay. I was waiting for the right timing to tell you because I thought it would be too harsh on you. Though it turned out this way, I feel like I can finally move on," I replied weakly, though I felt an immense dislike for the two who made Jake and me feel this way. Jake laughed weakly, but he seemed somewhat lonely. At the same time, I waited for my brother-in-law's recovery, and then we headed to his parents' house together. Upon explaining the sequence of events to my in-laws, they were momentarily at a loss for words. After learning the truth, with apologetic looks, they began to apologize. "Sarah, we're sorry for our foolish son's affair. We never expected this to happen," they said. "Please don't apologize. I'm okay," I assured them. "But right, honey?" "Yes, apologies won't fix this. We're truly sorry," my husband's father added. "It's okay. Instead, would you lend me and your son a little help?" I proposed to my in-laws. My brother-in-law and I each made simultaneous calls to his wife and my husband. Perhaps surprised to be called at the same time, Emily and my husband picked up the phone immediately. "Hello." "Sarah, what's up?" "What do you mean, what's up? You're with Emily right now, aren't you?" I confronted my husband. "What are you talking about? Why would I be with my brother's wife?" he replied, but I heard Emily's voice in the background. "When I called earlier and your brother knows everything, we've got concrete evidence of the affair," I asserted, my anger boiling over. Despite the evidence, my husband kept spouting nonsense, claiming it was a misunderstanding and he just happened to run into her. I was fed up with his lack of remorse and his constant prioritization of self-preservation, even at this point. Out of sheer anger and feeling betrayed, I raised my voice. "Shut up. Misunderstanding? What are you saying? At this point, do you think such excuses will work? You took advantage of my feelings and betrayed me in the worst possible way. I will never forgive you. I'm divorcing you, you scum." "Wait, I didn't intend a divorce." "What? How dare you say that after cheating on me? Just so you know, I have no intention of getting back with you or that woman. I hope you both go to hell. Your parents won't help you anymore. Suffer for the rest of your life, regretting what you've done, you piece of trash." Without waiting for his response, I hung up. Shortly after, my brother-in-law and I went to the city office to get divorce papers. Eventually, my husband and I divorced amicably. Initially reluctant, he finally signed the divorce papers after being persuaded by his parents. Of course, my brother-in-law's divorce was also finalized. We both demanded substantial alimony from them. Later, I found out that my ex-husband had been involved with my brother-in-law's wife for quite some time. Apparently, he was meeting her during lunch breaks and after work, and their affair was exposed at the worst possible time by their coworkers. As a result, his reputation at work plummeted. Unable to withstand the judgment from his colleagues, he eventually quit his job after repeated absences. My brother-in-law's wife, who was a stay-at-home wife, also had her life turned upside down. She lived with my ex-husband for a while after the divorce, but as their financial situation worsened, their arguments increased and they broke up within a few months. For a while, she won't be able to live a decent life. On my end, surprisingly, I've been getting by day to day without much fuss. Right after my divorce, I moved to an apartment near work, living the carefree life. I still keep in regular contact with my brother-in-law and my ex-in-laws. Where I am today is thanks to them. They will always be important people to me, and that will never change. I'll make sure to live in a way that won't bring shame to them. I'll prove that I can be happy on my own. That's the solemn promise I made to myself.
I'm Sarah, and it all started when I met Tom in college. We were in different courses, but we hit it off right away. He was charming, funny, and damn good looking. We dated throughout college, and by the time graduation rolled around, we were head over heels in love. We got hitched right after graduation, and I was on cloud 9. My parents, Ellen and George, were loaded. They'd always given me everything I wanted, and my wedding was no exception. It was a fairy tale affair, white dress, fancy venue, the works. The first year of marriage was bliss. We were young, in love, and had the world at our feet. Tom had landed a great job at a marketing firm, and I was working as a teacher at a local elementary school. Life was good. Then, about a year after we got married, I found out I was pregnant. I was over the moon. His reaction wasn't quite what I expected. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I brushed off his lukewarm response, chalking it up to shock. I was sure he'd come around once the news sank in. 9 months later, our daughter Lily was born. She was perfect, 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and a set of lungs that could wake the dead. I was smitten. Tom, on the other hand, seemed overwhelmed. He'd hold Lily awkwardly, like she was a ticking time bomb. When she cried, which was often, he'd practically run from the room. "I thought we'd have more time, you know," he said one night, after Lily had finally fallen asleep. "To enjoy being married, travel, all that stuff." I tried to reassure him. "We can still do all that, Tom. It'll just be a little different with Lily." As the months went by, Tom started staying late at work more and more often. He'd come home after Lily was asleep, citing big projects and demanding clients. I wanted to believe him, but a nagging doubt started to grow in the pit of my stomach. Friday nights became guys' night for Tom. He'd go out with his work buddies, coming home in the wee hours of the morning, reeking of booze. "Keep that kid quiet, will you?" he'd snap when Lily's cries woke him up. "Some of us need to sleep." 3 years flew by in a blur of diapers, tantrums, and stolen moments of joy. Lily was now 3, a bundle of energy with her dad's green eyes and my stubborn chin. I'd gone back to work, and Lily had started kindergarten. We'd fallen into a routine, but it felt like Tom and I were just going through the motions. Then came the day that shattered what was left of our marriage. "I've got a business trip next week," Tom announced over dinner one night. "I'll be gone for 3 days." I nodded, used to his frequent trips by now. The day after Tom left, I got a frantic call from his mother, Martha. "Sarah, I'm at the hospital," she said, her voice shaky. "I had some chest pains. Could you let Tom know?" My heart raced. "Of course, Martha. I'll call him right away." But Tom wasn't answering his phone. After trying for hours, I started to worry. What if something had happened to him too? In desperation, I called his boss, Mike. Business trip Mike sounded confused. I didn't send Tom on any trip. My world tilted on its axis. If Tom wasn't on a business trip, where the hell was he? When he waltzed through the door 3 days later, whistling like he didn't have a care in the world, I was ready. "How was your trip?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your mom's in the hospital, and your boss says he never sent you anywhere." The color drained from Tom's face. "Sarah, I can explain." "Save it," I spat. "Just tell me the truth for once. Are you cheating on me?" The silence that followed was all the answer I needed. "Her name's Amanda," Tom finally mumbled. "It's been going on for a while now." The divorce was ugly. Tom fought me on everything: the house, the car, even Lily's teddy bear, but the worst was when he refused to pay child support. "I'm not paying for a kid I never wanted," he snarled during one of our meetings. Something in me snapped. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "Keep your money. But I want you to sign away your parental rights. You clearly don't want to be a father, so make it official." To my shock, Tom didn't even hesitate. He signed the papers with a flourish, and just like that, he was out of our lives. The next 2 years were tough. Tom's parents, bless them, helped out with Lily and gave us money when they could. But being a single mom was harder than I'd ever imagined. Then, when Lily was 5, I met Jack. He was a widower with a daughter, Emma, who was a year younger than Lily. We bonded over playground meetups and PTA meetings, and before I knew it, I was falling in love again. We got married in a small ceremony, with Lily and Emma as our flower girls. Watching Jack with the girls, I felt hope blooming in my chest for the first time in years. As time passed, our little family grew closer. Lily started calling Jack Dad and Emma called me Mom. It felt right, like we were always meant to be together. 3 years after we got married, our son Max was born. Jack doted on all 3 kids equally, never distinguishing between his and mine. We were happy, really and truly happy. 20 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that Lily was a toddler, tottering around our living room. Now, at 25, she's a college graduate, engaged and planning her own wedding. Where did the time go? Lily's fiancé is a great guy. Jack and I both like him. He's kind, hardworking, and he clearly adores our daughter. When they announced their engagement, Jack opened a special account for Lily's wedding expenses and gave her full access. When we told Lily, she burst into tears and hugged us both. For weeks after that, our house was a flurry of wedding magazines, color swatches, and excited phone calls. Lily would burst through the door, bubbling over with news about venues, dresses, and floral arrangements. "Mom, Dad, you won't believe what we found," she'd exclaim, spreading photos across our kitchen table. "Isn't this centerpiece gorgeous?" Jack and I would nod and smile, caught up in her enthusiasm. It warmed my heart to see her so happy, to be part of this exciting time in her life. But then, things started to change. The visits became less frequent, the phone calls shorter. At first, I chalked it up to wedding stress. Planning a wedding is no small feat, after all. But as the weeks went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Lily showed up unannounced. The moment I saw her face, I knew something was wrong. Her usual bright smile was gone, replaced by a tense, almost nervous expression. "Mom, I need to talk to you and..." "Jack," she said, stumbling over the name. My heart dropped. Jack, not Dad. In all the years since Jack had come into our lives, I'd never heard Lily call him anything but Dad. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let me get Jack." I found my husband in the garage tinkering with his latest project. One look at my face and he was on his feet, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern etching his features. "It's Lily," I replied. "She wants to talk to us." "And Jack." "She called you Jack." I saw the hurt flash across his face before he schooled his expression into calm neutrality. He nodded, took my hand, and together we walked back into the house. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Jack and I sat down across from her, our hands still linked under the table. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. "All right, Lily," Jack said, his voice gentle despite the worry I could see in his eyes. "We're here. What did you want to talk about?" Lily took a deep breath, her eyes darting between Jack and me. "I met my biological father a couple of months ago. I was at Grandma Martha's and he showed up. We talked for hours. He's changed, Mom. He wants to make things right. I felt Jack stiffen beside me. And what does this have to do with the wedding, he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Lily's chin lifted, a stubborn set to her jaw that I recognized all too well. He asked to walk me down the aisle, and I want him to. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear the sound of Jack's heart breaking. Lily, I said gently, sweetheart, I know this is confusing. But Jack has been your dad since you were 5. Tom, he abandoned you. He signed away his rights. He made a mistake, Lily's voice rose. He's sorry now. He wants to fix things. Jack leaned forward, his face a mask of hurt and confusion. Lily, I've raised you as my own for 20 years. I've been there for every scraped knee, every school play, every heartbreak, I thought. I thought I was your dad. You are, Lily insisted, then faltered. I mean, you're my stepdad and I love you. But Tom is my real father. It's my wedding, and I want him to walk me down the aisle. I saw the moment Jack's heart shattered. His face crumpled for a split second before he regained control. Lily, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I've always considered you my daughter. Not my stepdaughter. My daughter. Well, I'm not, Lily shouted, jumping to her feet. You're my stepfather, not my real dad. This is my wedding, and I'll decide who walks me down the aisle. The front door slammed and Emma, Jack's biological daughter, rushed into the kitchen. What's going on? Why is everyone yelling? Close behind her was Max, our son, looking bewildered. Mom? Dad? Lily? I quickly filled them in, watching their faces change from confusion to anger. How could you do this to Dad? Emma demanded, glaring at Lily. After everything he's done for you. Max nodded, his young face twisted with hurt. Yeah, Lily. Dad's always treated us all the same. How can you say he's not your real dad? Lily looked around wildly, her eyes filling with tears. You don't understand. None of you understand. With that, she bolted from the house, the door slamming behind her. We all stood there in stunned silence. Jack's face was ashen, his eyes fixed on the spot where Lily had been standing. Emma moved to his side, wrapping an arm around him. Max joined them, and I watched as my family closed ranks around Jack. I moved to Jack's other side, taking his hand. He looked at me, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. I don't understand, he whispered. Where did I go wrong? My heart broke for him. For all of us. You didn't go wrong, Jack, I said firmly. You've been the best father any of these kids could ask for. Lily's, I don't know what's gotten into her. As we stood there, our little family huddled together in the kitchen, I couldn't help but wonder how had things gone so wrong, and more importantly, how were we going to fix this? The days following Lily's bombshell announcement were tense. Jack and I kept expecting her to call, to apologize, to come to her senses. But the call never came. Instead, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Friends and family members sending me links, asking if I'd seen Lily's latest posts. With a heavy heart, I opened her social media page. There they were. Photos of Lily with Tom, both grinning at the camera. So happy to reconnect with my real dad, the caption read. Each word felt like a knife twisting in my gut. When I showed Jack, his face hardened. That's it, he said, his voice low and controlled. If she doesn't consider me her father anymore, I'm not paying for her wedding. I'm blocking her access to the wedding account. She's made her choice. I didn't argue. How could I when he looked so broken? A few days later, the other shoe dropped. Lily burst into our house like a hurricane, her face red with fury. What the hell, she screamed, not even bothering with a greeting. Why can't I access the wedding account? How am I supposed to pay the vendors? The venue? The caterers? I'm sure your real father can help you out, Jack replied, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. Since you've chosen him, it seems only right that he should foot the bill. Lily gaped at him, then turned to me. Mom, you can't let him do this. Make him give me access to the account again. I shook my head slowly. Lily, this is Jack's decision. And frankly, I agree with him. What, she shrieked. How can you take his side? I'm your daughter. And Jack is my husband, I replied firmly. He's been more of a father to you than Tom ever was. You can't expect to hurt him like this and still have him pay for your wedding. Lily's face contorted with rage. Fine, she spat. If that's how it's going to be, then you need to make a choice, Mom. It's me or him. Your daughter or your husband. Choose. She stood there, chest heaving, clearly expecting me to cave. To choose her, my flesh and blood, over Jack. But in that moment, looking at her tantrum-throwing face, I didn't recognize my daughter at all. I'm not choosing anyone, Lily, I said quietly. I love you and I love Jack, but I agree with his decision. You're an adult now. If you want Tom to be your real father, then you need to deal with the consequences of that choice. Lily's face crumpled. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the little girl she used to be, the one who would run to Jack with skinned knees and bad dreams. Then her expression hardened again. I hate you, she sobbed. I hate both of you. And with that, she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. A few days after Lily's dramatic exit, my phone buzzed again. Another social media notification. With a sense of dread, I opened it. There was Lily, beaming next to Tom. The caption read, "Thanks to my amazing dad for funding my dream wedding. It's going to be the event of the century. P.S. Sarah, Jack, and kids don't bother showing up. You're not invited." I showed Jack, who just shook his head sadly. Where did Tom suddenly get all this money, he wondered aloud. I shrugged. Who knows, maybe he won the lottery. Either way, it's not our problem anymore. We tried to put it out of our minds to focus on our life and our other kids. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A week later, there was a knock at our door. I opened it to find Martha and George, Tom's parents, looking worried and frazzled. Sarah, dear Martha said, wringing her hands, "We need your help." I ushered them in, calling for Jack. Once we were all settled in the living room, George spoke up. "We got a call from the bank," he explained. "They're saying we've missed a loan payment, but we never took out a loan." The next day I found myself at the bank with Martha and George, piecing together a disturbing puzzle. Tom, it turned out, had taken out a massive loan using forged documents. He'd made his parents unwitting co-signers. "I'm so sorry," the bank manager said, looking genuinely distressed. "But unless the loan is repaid, we'll have to start proceedings against Mr. and Mrs. Johnson." Martha burst into tears. George looked shell-shocked. "We'll figure this out," I assured them, even as my mind raced. How could Tom do this to his own parents? Back at home, I filled Jack in on everything. He listened, his face growing grimmer by the second. "We need to call the police," he said finally. "Tom's committed fraud. His parents shouldn't suffer for his crimes." I nodded, my heart heavy. Despite everything, I never wanted it to come to this. The next few days were a whirlwind. Police statements, bank meetings, more tears from Martha and George, and then, finally, the news we'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure: Tom had been arrested. As the details emerged, the full scope of Tom's deception became clear. He'd taken out the loan not just for Lily's wedding, but to impress a new girlfriend. He'd been living large on borrowed money and forged signatures. "The funds have been frozen," the detective informed us. "We'll be seizing them as evidence." My thoughts immediately went to Lily. All that money she'd been bragging about, the lavish wedding she'd been planning, it was all gone. Fruits of a poison tree. That evening, as Jack and I sat on the porch, trying to process everything that had happened, my phone rang. It was Lily. "Mom," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "Everything's ruined. The money's gone. The wedding's off. What am I going to do?" I closed my eyes, feeling a complex mix of emotions: sympathy, frustration, a tiny bit of vindication. But mostly I felt tired, so very tired. "I don't know, Lily," I said softly. "I really don't know." A few days after the phone call, Lily showed up at our doorstep. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair disheveled. She looked nothing like the radiant bride to be she'd been just weeks ago. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice small. I noticed she was calling Jack Dad again. "I need your help." We invited her in, sitting around the kitchen table where we'd had so many family discussions before. Jack's face was a mask of calm, but I could see the turmoil in his eyes. "The wedding's off unless we can find the money," Lily explained, her words tumbling out. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please, can you help me? Can you give me the money for the wedding?" I glanced at Jack. His jaw was set, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him wanted to sweep in and fix everything, like he always had. But we both knew we couldn't do that this time. "Lily," I said gently, "we can't just give you the money. Not after everything that's happened." But Lily started to protest, but Jack cut her off. "We can't forgive you that quickly," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Actions have consequences, Lily. You made your choice, and now you have to deal with the fallout." Lily's face crumpled. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "Ben is furious. He says I'm unstable, that I create drama. He's threatening to call off the engagement if we can't have the wedding we planned." My heart ached for her. Despite everything, she was still my little girl. I wanted to wrap her in my arms and make everything better, but I knew we couldn't. "Sweetheart," I said, reaching out to take her hand. "I'm so sorry you're going through this. But this is a problem you created, and it's one you need to solve yourself." "We love you," Jack added, his voice thick with emotion. "But we can't bail you out of this. It wouldn't be right, and it wouldn't help you in the long run." Lily looked between us, realization dawning in her eyes. We weren't going to cave. We weren't going to fix this for her. "Fine," she spat, yanking her hand away from mine. "I'll figure it out myself. I don't need you. Either of you." She stormed out, leaving Jack and me sitting in stunned silence. Weeks passed. We heard through the grapevine that Lily and Ben had gotten married at the city hall, with just a handful of guests present. We weren't invited. The night we heard about the wedding, I found Jack sitting on the porch, staring into the distance. "I feel like I failed her," he said quietly as I sat down next to him. I took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You didn't fail her, Jack. We raised her to be strong, independent, and responsible. Sometimes that means letting her face the consequences of her actions." "But what if we pushed her away for good?" he asked, his voice breaking. I leaned my head on his shoulder. "Every person in life faces situations where they have to make a choice," I said softly. "Sometimes those choices turn out to be wrong. That's what happened with Lily. But she's strong. She'll learn from this, and hopefully she'll find her way back to us." We sat there in silence, watching the sun set. Our family had been through a storm, and I knew we weren't out of the woods yet. But as I sat there with Jack, I felt a glimmer of hope. We'd weathered storms before. We'd weather this one too. 3 months after Lily's hasty City Hall wedding, I bumped into an old friend at the grocery store. As we caught up, she let slip something that made my heart skip a beat. "I heard Lily and Ben are having trouble," she said, lowering her voice. "Someone told me they're talking about divorce." I thanked her, my mind reeling. As soon as I got home, I filled Jack in. We debated for hours before finally deciding to reach out to Lily. To our surprise, she answered on the first ring. "Mom," her voice was small, reminding me of when she was little and had a nightmare. "Sweetheart," we heard. "Is everything okay?" There was a long pause, then a choked sob. "No, Mom. Nothing's okay." Jack and I invited her and Ben over. The next evening, they sat across from us at the kitchen table, looking worn and defeated. "We can't stop fighting," Lily admitted, her eyes downcast. "Ben resents me for the wedding fiasco, for alienating all of you. His parents are furious that they weren't at the wedding." Ben nodded, looking miserable. "I love Lily, but I don't know if love is enough anymore." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Marriage isn't easy," I started. "God knows Jack and I have had our rough patches. But divorce, that's a big step. Are you sure you've tried everything?" Lily burst into tears. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "For everything. Dad, Jack, I'm so sorry for what I said, for how I treated you. Mom, I'm sorry for trying to make you choose. I've ruined everything." Jack reached across the table, taking Lily's hand. "You haven't ruined everything, sweetheart. You made mistakes, yes, but we all do. Have you considered seeing a family therapist?" To our relief, they both nodded. We spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking, for the first time in months. There were more tears, but also laughter, and by the time Lily and Ben left, I felt a glimmer of hope. Over the next few months, Lily and Ben threw themselves into therapy. Jack and I even joined them for a session at the therapist's request. It was hard, dredging up old hurts and misunderstandings, but it was also healing. Slowly but surely we saw changes. Lily and Ben started looking at each other the way they used to. Family dinners became a regular thing again, filled with conversation and laughter instead of tension. One evening, as Jack and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lily joined us. She snuggled up next to Jack like she used to when she was little. "Dad," she said softly, "I'm so sorry for everything. You've always been my real dad, and I was an idiot to ever say otherwise." Jack hugged her tight, his eyes misty. "I love you, kiddo. Always have, always will." As for Tom, we heard through Martha and George that he'd received a suspended sentence for the fraud. Last we knew, he'd left town, hopefully to start fresh somewhere else. Life isn't perfect. Lily and Ben still have their struggles and our family is still healing. But as I sit here watching Jack and Lily chatting and laughing, I feel hopeful. We've weathered this storm, and I believe we've come out stronger for it. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this family isn't about blood or legal documents. It's about love, forgiveness, and sticking together even when things get tough. And by that definition, we are most definitely a family. I'm Hannah, and I met John in college, and we clicked instantly. He was charming, funny, and ambitious. We got married right after graduation and started building our life together. When our daughter Sophie was born, I was over the moon. I poured all my love and energy into raising her, determined to give her the best start in life. I believed in setting boundaries and instilling discipline. Knowledge is power, I'd always tell her. Study hard and you'll go far. John, on the other hand, had a different parenting style. He'd shower Sophie with gifts, buy her sweets, and let her get away with things I wouldn't. "Come on, Hannah," he'd say. "Let her be a kid." It bothered me, but I figured we balanced each other out. As Sophie grew older, it became clear she was a daddy's girl. She'd run to John with her problems, laugh at his jokes, and light up when he came home from work. With me, it was all eye rolls and yes, mom in that tone teenager's perfect. I'd bite my tongue, reminding myself that Sophie would understand when she was older. She'd see that my strict approach came from a place of love. But even at 17, Sophie remained firmly in her father's camp. It stung, but I consoled myself with the thought that I was doing right by her in the long run. Despite these small frustrations, I considered myself fulfilled. I had a successful career at a respected clinic, a husband who still made me laugh, and a daughter who, despite our differences, I adored. Life was good, or so I thought. Everything changed on a crisp autumn day. I was doing laundry, a mundane task I'd done 1,000 times before. As I emptied John's coat pockets, my fingers brushed against a piece of paper. I pulled it out, expecting a grocery receipt or a dry cleaning ticket. Instead, I found myself staring at a receipt from an upscale perfume store. The perfume listed was an expensive brand I'd never wear, too floral, too sweet. John knew I preferred subtler scents. I stood there, the washing machine humming in the background, as 1,000 possibilities raced through my mind. Was it a surprise gift? But my birthday had passed, and our anniversary was months away. Was it for his mother? But she was allergic to most perfumes. With shaking hands, I took a picture of the receipt with my phone. Then, carefully, I placed it back in his pocket. I needed time to think, to process this information without jumping to conclusions. That evening, when John was in the shower, I checked his coat again. The receipt was gone. I kept my discovery to myself, not breathing a word to John or Sophie, but now that my eyes were open, I couldn't stop noticing things. It was like a fog had lifted, revealing a landscape I didn't recognize. John's late nights at work weren't new, but now they felt different. "Big project, honey," he'd say, kissing me on the cheek as he left. "Don't wait up," I'd nod and smile, all the while wondering who he was really meeting. His new haircut caught my attention too. He'd always been particular about his appearance, but this was different. Younger. Trendier. When I complimented him, he shrugged it off. Thought I'd try something new. The weekend fishing trips were the worst. Every other Saturday he'd load up his gear and head out to meet his buddies. "Fish are really biting lately," he'd say with a grin. I'd watch him drive away, wondering if he even owned a fishing rod anymore. Before finding that receipt, I hadn't connected these dots. Now they formed a picture I couldn't unsee. The thought I'd been avoiding burst to the surface. John had a mistress. I tried to shake it off. This was John, my John. The man who held my hand through 20 hours of labor. The guy who surprised me with flowers on random Tuesdays. He wouldn't cheat. But the doubt gnawed at me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake, listening to John's steady breathing, wondering if he was dreaming of her. One sleepless night, I found myself scrolling through Facebook. A name caught my eye: Mike Thompson. We'd gone to high school together, and I vaguely remembered he'd become a private investigator. Before I could talk myself out of it, I sent him a message. We met at a coffee shop across town the next day. I took a deep breath and spilled everything. The receipt, John's behavior, my suspicions. Mike listened without interrupting, his face neutral. Mike agreed to take the case. As I watched him leave, I felt a mix of relief and dread. Soon I'd have answers, but did I really want them? The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my life. I went through the motions, smiling at my patients, helping Sophie with her schoolwork, making small talk with John over dinner. But inside, I was a mess. Every time my phone buzzed, I'd jump, thinking it was Mike with news. Every time John came home late, I'd search his face for signs of guilt. Every time Sophie mentioned her dad, I'd wonder if she knew something I didn't. "You okay, Mom?" Sophie asked one evening, catching me staring blankly at the wall. "You seem off." I plastered on a smile. "Just tired, sweetie. Lots of clients this week." She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. I felt a pang of guilt for lying to her, but what could I say? Your dad might be cheating on me, and I've hired someone to spy on him. John, caught up in whatever or whoever was occupying his time, didn't seem to notice anything amiss. Part of me was relieved, part of me was furious that he could be so oblivious to my pain. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was between clients when my phone buzzed. Mike's name flashed on the screen, and my heart leapt into my throat. "Hannah? Can we meet?" His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. We agreed to meet at the same coffee shop in an hour. The rest of my appointments were a blur. I went through the motions, smiling and nodding at my clients while my mind raced. Mike was already there when I arrived, a thick manila envelope on the table in front of him. My stomach dropped at the sight of it. "Hannah." Mike pushed the envelope towards me. "It's all in here. Photos, dates, locations. I'm sorry, Hannah, but your suspicions were right." With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. The first photo hit me like a punch to the gut. John, my John, with his arms around a younger woman. They were laughing, looking into each other's eyes with unmistakable affection. "Who is she?" I managed to choke out. "Alicia Benson," Mike replied. "She's 28, works at John's company. She's the director's daughter." I flipped through more photos. John and Alicia at restaurants, walking in the park, boarding a yacht. Each image was a fresh wound. "They'd been seeing each other for over a year," Mike continued. "From what I've gathered, it's serious. They've talked about a future together." I nodded numbly, barely registering his words. Then a photo made me gasp. It showed John and Alicia at a cafe, but they weren't alone. Sitting with them, smiling and laughing, was Sophie. "No," I whispered. "It can't be." Mike's voice was gentle. "I'm sorry, Hannah, but Sophie knows about the affair. She's met with them several times. Those weekends she said she was with friends? She was with them on Alicia's yacht. There's more. John and Alicia have been buying Sophie expensive gifts. Designer clothes. Jewelry. I think they're trying to buy her silence." I don't remember the drive home. Thankfully, the house was empty when I arrived. I moved on autopilot, packing a small suitcase with clothes and essentials. I couldn't stay here, couldn't face John or Sophie. I checked into a hotel across town, my mind still reeling. Once in my room, I called my boss at the clinic and took 2 weeks off, unpaid. Family emergency. I turned off my phone and sank onto the bed. The envelope seemed to mock me from the bedside table. Unable to help myself, I opened it again. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those damning photos. Sophie's smile as she hugged Alicia, John's arm around them both. My anger, which had started as a slow simmer, began to boil over. For years I'd been the understanding one, the peacemaker, the one who bent over backwards to keep everyone happy. Well, I was done with that. My eyes fell on my laptop. Without really thinking, I opened it and logged into my bank account. There it was, Sophie's college fund. I'd been squirreling away money for years, determined to give her the best education possible. It was my way of showing love, even when she pushed me away. Now, looking at that balance, all I could think about was how Sophie had betrayed me. How she'd lied to my face, spent time with that woman, accepted her gifts. My daughter, who I'd sacrificed so much for, had stabbed me in the back. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. Years ago, before Sophie was born, I dreamed of opening my own cosmetology office. But then life happened: marriage, a baby, mortgage payments. My dream got pushed aside. I stared at the account balance. It was enough. Enough to start over, to finally pursue my own dreams instead of everyone else's. You know what I said out loud to the empty hotel room? Screw it. This money isn't for Sophie anymore. It's for me. The words hung in the air, both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had a future, even if it wasn't the one I'd planned. Emotionally drained, I finally drifted off to sleep, my phone still turned off. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. For a blissful moment, I forgot everything. Then reality came crashing back. With a deep breath, I turned on my phone. It immediately exploded with notifications. Missed calls from John and Sophie. Voicemails. Text messages asking where I was, if I was okay. Their concern, which once would have melted my heart, now felt like acid in my veins. How dare they pretend to care now? I didn't bother listening to the voicemails or reading the texts. Instead, I got dressed, packed my bag, and checked out of the hotel. It was time to face the music. The drive home felt surreal. Part of me wanted to keep driving, to disappear and start a new life somewhere else. But I squashed that impulse. I needed closure. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw John's car and Sophie's bike. They were both home. Good. I walked in, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. John and Sophie rushed out of the living room, their faces a mix of relief and anxiety. "Hannah, where have you been?" "We've been so worried," John exclaimed, moving to hug me. Sophie chimed in, her voice shrill with concern. "Mom, are you okay? Why didn't you answer our calls?" I stepped back, avoiding John's embrace. A cold laugh escaped me, stopping them both in their tracks. Without a word, I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. I tossed it on the coffee table, photos spilling out. John and Sophie stared at the images, their faces draining of color. There they were, in glossy 8x10s, John with Alicia, Sophie with them both. The silence that followed my revelation was deafening. John was the first to recover, his shock morphing into defensive anger. "Hannah, it's not what you think," he started, his voice placating. "Alicia and I were just friends, and Sophie, she..." "Don't you dare drag Sophie into your lies," I cut him off, my voice ice cold. Sophie jumped in, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Mom, please, I can explain. I only met her a few times, I didn't know." I held up a hand, silencing them both. "Save it, I know everything. The yacht trips, the expensive gifts, the dinners. Every lie, every betrayal." They exchanged a look, and I saw the moment they realized their act wasn't working. The mask slipped away, revealing the strangers beneath. John's face hardened, all pretense of remorse vanishing. "Fine," he said coldly. "You want the truth? Yes, I'm with Alicia. She's young, beautiful, and rich. She makes me feel alive in a way you haven't in years." His words were like a slap to the face, but I refused to flinch. Instead, I turned to Sophie, waiting for her contribution to this character assassination. She didn't disappoint. Alicia is amazing, Mom, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. She's successful, stylish, fun, not strict and boring like you. I absorbed their words, each one a fresh wound. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I see, I said, my voice steady. Well, let me tell you both something. John, I want a divorce. I'll have my lawyer contact you. John's eyes widened, but before he could speak, I turned to Sophie. And you, young lady, you can forget about me paying for your college tuition. If Alicia is so amazing, maybe she can foot the bill. Sophie's jaw dropped. What? You can't do that. That's my money. I've been counting on it. I want to get into my dream school. Should have thought about that before you stabbed me in the back, I replied, unmoved by her crocodile tears. Mom, please, she sobbed, her cool demeanor crumbling. I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said. Please forgive me. I need that money. But her earlier words echoed in my mind. Strict, boring. Worse than the other woman. Ignoring their protests, I went upstairs and packed the rest of my belongings. As I came back down, suitcase in hand, John blocked my path. Hannah, let's talk about this rationally, he said, his tone businesslike. The house, our assets. My lawyer will be in touch, I interrupted, pushing past him. I'm done talking to you. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I found a small apartment and threw myself into the logistics of dismantling a 20-year marriage. I hired a lawyer and requested a mediator, determined to handle this divorce as cleanly as possible. The last thing I wanted was a drawn-out, messy court battle. Sophie called incessantly at first. When I didn't pick up, she resorted to texts, then emails. Each message was a mix of apology and demand. I read each one, my heart breaking anew every time. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself staring at my phone, Sophie's number on the screen. My finger would hover over the call button, a war raging inside me. Part of me yearned to hear her voice, to believe her apologies. But then I'd remember her cruel words, her secret meetings with John and Alicia, and I'd put the phone down. Days turned into weeks. Each meeting with John was a test of endurance, conducted in the sterile environment of our lawyers' offices. The man I once loved was now just another face across the conference table, all business and cold efficiency. One day, as I settled into my usual chair, the door opened and Sophie walked in behind John. My heart clenched at the sight of her, but her expression stopped any warm feelings cold. She looked at me with a mixture of condescension and triumph that took my breath away. Hello, Mother, she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. I hope you don't mind me joining today. Before I could respond, she continued, I just wanted to let you know that I won't be needing your pathetic money after all. Alicia has generously offered to pay for my education at any top college in the States. She paused, clearly savoring the moment. Oh, and I'll be living with Dad and Alicia from now on. We're going to be one big, happy family. I felt the eyes of our lawyers and the mediator on me, waiting for my reaction. But I was too tired, too drained to feel much of anything anymore. I simply shrugged. If that's what you want, Sophie, I said, my voice flat, I hope you'll be happy. Something flickered in her eyes, disappointment. Had she been hoping for a bigger reaction? But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same smug look. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of legal jargon and asset division. In the end, John and I split everything down the middle. The house would be sold, with the proceeds divided equally between us. With my share from the house sale and the money I'd saved for Sophie's college fund, I had enough to make a fresh start. I found a small but cozy apartment and, after much soul-searching, decided to take a leap of faith. I quit my job at the clinic and threw myself into creating a business plan for my own cosmetology office. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. All those years of experience, all the dreams I'd put on hold, it was time to put them to use. Weeks of planning, renovating, and nervous anticipation followed. But finally, Hannah's Beauty Haven opened its doors. Those first few months were a whirlwind of long hours, social media marketing blitzes, and the slow but steady growth of my client base. In quiet moments, usually late at night when the day's work was done, I'd find myself scrolling through social media. Sophie's posts would appear on my feed, pictures of her in designer clothes, lounging on Alicia's yacht, always smiling, always looking carefree and happy. Each image was a knife to my heart. I'd wonder if she ever thought of me, if she missed me at all. When her 18th birthday rolled around, I sent her a message wishing her well. Same for her high school graduation. Both went unanswered. A year had passed since the divorce, and life had settled into a new rhythm. My cosmetology office, once just a dream, was now a thriving reality. The steady stream of loyal clients from my clinic days, combined with a growing number of new faces, kept me busier than I'd ever been. I'd even hired 2 assistants to help manage the workload. On a sunny Tuesday afternoon, as I was finishing up with a client, my phone buzzed. It was my cousin, Sarah. "Hannah, you won't believe what I just saw," she said, her voice a mix of concern and disbelief. "I was at the Meadowbrook supermarket, you know, the one on the other side of town, and I swear I saw Sophie working at the checkout." My heart skipped a beat. "Sophie? Are you sure?" "Positive." She looked different, thinner, tired, but it was definitely her. I thanked Sarah and hung up, my mind reeling. Sophie, working at a supermarket. What about college? What about Alicia's promise to fund her education? That night, after closing the office, I did something I hadn't done in months. I looked up Sophie's social media. What I found shocked me. All her glamorous photos with John and Alicia were gone. There were no updates, no college move-in pictures, nothing. Her once active profile was a digital ghost town. For days I wrestled with what to do. Part of me wanted to rush to the supermarket to demand answers. But another part, the part still nursing the wounds of betrayal, held me back. Finally, on my day off, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the Meadowbrook supermarket, my heart pounding as I walked through the automatic doors. And there she was. Sophie, my baby girl, looking so different from the confident young woman who'd sneered at me in the lawyer's office. She was thin, almost gaunt, dark circles under her eyes as she mechanically scanned items at the checkout. Our eyes met, and I saw a flash of something. Embarrassment? Shame? Before I could decipher it, she looked away, her cheeks flushing. I approached her checkout, my steps hesitant. "Sophie." She glanced up, then quickly back down at the register. "What do you want?" Her voice was harsh, defensive. "I'd like to talk. Maybe we could get coffee after your shift." "I don't want to talk to you," she snapped, still not meeting my eyes. "Please leave." "Sophie, please." I said leave. She finally looked at me, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and something else. Was it fear? Stunned by her vehemence, I backed away. Other customers were starting to stare. With a heavy heart, I left the supermarket, climbing into my car with shaking hands. As I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind of questions. What had happened? Where were John and Alicia? Why wasn't Sophie in college? For days after, I waited for a call, a text, anything. But my phone remained stubbornly silent. I thought about going back to the supermarket, but Sophie's words rang in my ears. "I don't want to talk to you." Just as I was beginning to lose hope, my phone rang. An unknown number flashed on the screen. With a mix of trepidation and curiosity, I answered. Mom. Sophie's voice, small and uncertain, came through the speaker. "Can we meet, please?" We agreed to meet at a small cafe near my office. As I waited, my mind raced with possibilities. When Sophie walked in, my breath caught. She looked so different from the glowing, confident girl in those yacht photos, so much older than her years. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of unsaid words hanging between us. Finally, Sophie spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything." And then, like a dam breaking, the story poured out of her. At first, living with John and Alicia had been a dream. Designer clothes, yacht trips, promises of a bright future. But the honeymoon period didn't last. Alicia started making comments, Sophie said, her eyes fixed on her untouched coffee. Little digs about how much space I took up, how expensive I was. Then she told Dad I couldn't live with them anymore, that there was no money for college. I gasped. "But your father?" Surely he didn't agree. Sophie's bitter laugh was answer enough. He said I was an adult now, that I needed to stand on my own 2 feet. They kicked me out, Mom. I had nowhere to go. Why didn't you call me? I asked, reaching for her hand across the table. She pulled away, tears in her eyes. I was so ashamed. And then I realized, this must be how you felt when we betrayed you. I couldn't face you after that. My heart broke for her, even as a small, petty part of me whispered, "Good. Now she knows how it feels." I'm sharing a crappy apartment with a coworker, Sophie continued. The supermarket job barely covers rent and food. I feel so useless. I wanted to wrap her in my arms, to tell her everything would be okay. But I knew it wasn't that simple. "Sophie," I said gently, "I'm so sorry you're going through this, but you're right, you did betray me. Actions have consequences, and this is something you need to work through." We both cried then, mourning the lost year, the broken trust, the pain we'd caused each other. As we parted, something had shifted between us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. That night I tossed and turned, Sophie's story playing on repeat in my mind. By morning I'd made a decision. I called Sophie. "I have a proposition for you," I said. "I need an administrator at my office. The pay's not great, but it's better than the supermarket. And maybe we can start rebuilding from there." There was a long pause. Then, "Yes, I'd like that. Thank you, Mom." It's been 6 months since that day. Sophie works at my office now, learning the business from the ground up. She's saving for community college, determined to make it on her own merit this time. Our relationship is a work in progress. There are good days and bad days, moments of connection and moments of tension. The trust we once had is slowly, painstakingly being rebuilt, one day at a time. As I watch Sophie greet a client with a warm smile, I feel a glimmer of hope. We're not the same people we were before the betrayal, the divorce, the year of silence. But maybe, just maybe, we can be something new, something stronger.
I'm Deborah, and I was born into what seemed like a perfect family. My dad worked as an engineer at a local factory, bringing home a good paycheck. Mom stayed at home, taking care of the house. Those early years were happy ones, filled with laughter and love. I remember Dad coming home from work, his face lighting up when he saw me. "There's my little princess," he'd say, scooping me up in his strong arms. Mom would smile, watching us from the kitchen doorway. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I was 7 when everything changed. It started on a regular Tuesday. Dad came home from work looking pale and sweaty. I watched from the stairs as he slumped onto the couch, rubbing his chest. "Maybe you should see a doctor," Mom suggested. Dad shook his head. "Nah, it'll pass. Don't fuss, Sarah." That evening, as we sat down for dinner, Dad suddenly clutched his chest and fell from his chair. Mom screamed, rushing to his side. "Deborah, call 911!" she yelled, her voice shrill with panic. With shaking hands, I dialed the number, telling the operator what happened. The wait for the ambulance felt like an eternity. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits and hushed conversations. Words like heart attack and permanent damage floated around, their meaning lost on my young mind. When Dad finally came home, he wasn't the same. He couldn't work at the factory anymore. Instead, he got a new job in an office, but it didn't pay nearly as well. That's when the fighting started. "We can't afford this, Sarah," Dad would shout, waving bills in the air. "Well, what do you expect me to do about it?" Mom would snap back. "I'm not going to work. That's your job." I'd hide in my room, pillow over my ears, trying to drown out their angry voices. One night, I overheard Mom on the phone with Dad's parents. "You need to help us," she was saying. "We're struggling here." But Grandma and Grandpa weren't having it. "You've got insurance money," Grandma said, her voice crackling through the speaker. "And it's about time you started working too, Sarah. You can't expect John to do it all, especially now." Mom slammed the phone down, muttering under her breath. The fights got worse after that. Mom kept demanding more money, and Dad kept saying we didn't have it. I watched helplessly as Dad grew paler and more tired each day. 3 years after his first heart attack, Dad had another one. This time, he didn't make it. I was 10 years old when I lost my father. After Dad's funeral, things changed fast. I overheard heated arguments between Mom and my grandparents, words flying like daggers. "You're taking everything for yourself," Grandma accused, her voice trembling with anger. "What about Deborah?" John wanted her to be taken care of. Mom's reply was cold. "I'm her mother. I'll decide what's best for her." I didn't understand then what they were fighting about. Money, inheritance, embezzlement. These were just big words to me. All I knew was that Mom seemed different, harder somehow. Before I could make sense of it all, Mom dropped another bombshell. "Deborah, I'm getting married again," she announced one day, not even looking at me as she applied her lipstick. The wedding was a blur. Mom looked happy, but I felt lost. Her new husband, Tom, barely acknowledged me. It didn't take long for me to realize I wasn't part of their plans. One morning, Mom sat me down. "Deborah, you're going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while." "But why?" I asked, fighting back tears. "Tom and I need some time to ourselves," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. And just like that, I was shipped off to my grandparents' house. It was big and luxurious, nothing like our old home. Grandma and Grandpa were kind, always making sure I had everything I needed. But despite their love, I missed Mom terribly. Months passed. I settled into a routine with my grandparents, finding comfort in their steady presence. But a part of me always hoped Mom would come back for me. Then, out of the blue, she did. "Deborah, pack your bags. You're coming home," Mom said during one of her rare visits. My heart soared. She missed me. She wanted me back. I hugged Grandma and Grandpa goodbye, promising to visit often. But my joy was short-lived. As soon as we got home, I realized why Mom had really brought me back. "This is your baby brother, Jake," she said, handing me a squirming bundle. "You'll be helping me take care of him." Reality hit hard. I wasn't brought back because Mom missed me. I was brought back to be a nanny. My days became a blur of school, chores, and babysitting. While Mom went out with Tom or met her friends, I was left to watch Jake. Homework became an afterthought. Between changing diapers and cleaning the house, there was little time for studying. One evening, as I struggled to calm a colicky Jake while trying to finish a book report, Tom came home early. "Where's your mother?" he asked, frowning at the mess in the living room. "She went out with her friends," I mumbled, bouncing Jake on my hip. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll take him. You try to clean up a bit." As I picked up toys and wiped down surfaces, I couldn't help but wonder, was this what family was supposed to be like? An absent mother, a distant stepfather, and a child forced to grow up too fast? My life as a makeshift nanny took its toll. I was exhausted all the time, falling asleep in class and forgetting assignments. It didn't take long for my teachers to notice. One day, Mrs. Thompson, my English teacher, pulled me aside after class. "Deborah, is everything okay at home?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. I mumbled something about being tired, but Mrs. Thompson wasn't buying it. A week later, I found out she'd called Grandma, and Grandma, in turn, called Mom. After a heated argument, Mom slammed the phone down and turned to me. "Pack your bags," she said coldly. "You're going back to your grandparents." I was torn between relief and hurt. Part of me was glad to escape the endless chores and babysitting, but another part felt rejected all over again. Life at Grandma and Grandpa's was like before, stable, loving, and focused on my well-being. My grades started to improve, and I felt like a kid again. Months passed with barely a word from Mom. Then, out of the blue, Grandma got another call. "Sarah's divorced Tom," Grandma told me later, her voice a mix of surprise and disappointment. "He's taken Jake and moved to another city." I felt a pang of sadness for my little brother, but also a strange sense of relief. At least he was with his dad, who seemed to care more than Mom ever did. That's when Mom discovered social media. Suddenly, my phone was buzzing with notifications. Mom was posting constantly, selfies at clubs, pictures of fancy meals, and lots of photos with a guy who looked barely older, over 18 years old. But it wasn't just new boyfriends Mom was experimenting with. Soon, her posts took a different turn. Just got my new girls. Read one post, accompanied by a photo of Mom in a tight top, her chest suddenly much larger than I remembered. The surgeries didn't stop there. Every few months, there'd be a new post about another procedure. Bigger hips, plumper lips. Even her eyes looked different. I watched from afar as Mom transformed herself, post by post, surgery by surgery. The woman in the photos looked nothing like the mother I remembered. It was like watching a stranger play dress-up with my mom's life. Through all of this, Mom never once asked about me. No calls on my birthday. No messages asking how school was going. Nothing. At first, it hurt. I'd cry myself to sleep, wondering why I wasn't enough for her. But as time passed, the pain dulled. I stopped expecting her calls, stopped hoping she'd suddenly remember she had a daughter. The years flew by faster than I could have imagined. Before I knew it, I was standing on the stage in my cap and gown, accepting my high school diploma. Grandma and Grandpa cheered louder than anyone else in the audience. Mom wasn't there, but I'd stopped expecting her to show up long ago. Thanks to my grandparents' generosity, I headed off to college that fall. They insisted on paying for everything, waving away my protests. "Your education is the best investment we could make," Grandma said firmly. "Just focus on your studies." And I did. College was challenging, exciting, and everything I'd hoped for. I made new friends, discovered my passion for marketing, and for the first time in my life, felt like I was truly becoming my own person. 4 years later, I graduated with honors and landed a job at a local advertising firm. The day I got my first paycheck, I knew what I had to do. "I'm moving out," I told Grandma and Grandpa over dinner. "I found an apartment I can afford." They exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. "Are you sure, Deborah?" Grandma asked. "You know you're always welcome here." "I'm sure," I said, squeezing her hand. "It's time for me to stand on my own 2 feet, but I'll visit all the time, I promise." Life settled into a new rhythm. Work was challenging but rewarding, and I was slowly building a life for myself. But as I was flourishing, my grandparents were fading. It started with little things. Grandpa forgetting where he put his glasses, Grandma getting tired more easily. Then came the doctor's appointments, the concerned looks, the hushed phone calls. I spent every free moment with them, trying to repay a fraction of the love and care they'd given me. Weekends were filled with quiet afternoons watching old movies, or just sitting and talking. One chilly autumn morning, I got the call I'd been dreading. Grandpa had passed away in his sleep. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and tearful relatives. Through it all, Grandma was a pillar of strength, but I could see the light had gone out of her eyes. Grandma didn't last long after Grandpa died. It was like she'd lost her will to go on without him. 3 months later, I was planning another funeral. As I was going through Grandma's address book, I found Mom's number and, against my better judgment, sent a text. "Grandma's funeral is tomorrow. It would mean a lot if you came." The reply came hours later. "Sorry, can't make it." Those people were practically strangers to me anyway. Those people, my grandparents, the ones who'd raised me, loved me, supported me. Strangers to her? I deleted her number right then and there. After the funeral, the lawyer called me in to read the will. I sat in his office, feeling numb, as he explained that Grandma and Grandpa had left me everything. Their house, their savings, all of it. "It's a considerable sum," the lawyer said gently. "They wanted to make sure you were taken care of?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Even in death, they were still looking out for me. As I left the lawyer's office, clutching the paperwork, I felt a strange mix of grief and gratitude. I'd lost the 2 people who'd been my rock for so long, but their final gift meant I'd never have to worry about financial security again. The task of sorting through my grandparents' belongings was both emotionally draining and strangely cathartic. Each object held a memory, a piece of the life we'd shared. I worked my way through the house, room by room, until I reached Grandpa's study. His desk was a treasure trove of old documents, each neatly filed away. As I sifted through them, a yellowed envelope caught my eye. My heart skipped a beat when I saw my father's handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it. It was Dad's will, dated just before he died. As I read, my vision blurred with tears. To my dear Sarah, it read, "I leave the bulk of our savings. But I ask that a portion be set aside for Deborah's college education. Our daughter's future is important, and I want to ensure she has the best opportunities possible." The paper crumpled in my fist as a wave of anger washed over me. Mom had known all along. She'd had money specifically meant for my education, money Dad had wanted me to have. And she'd kept it all for herself. Suddenly, all those arguments I'd overheard as a child made sense. Grandma and Grandpa accusing Mom of embezzlement, of taking everything for herself. They'd been right. For a moment, I considered calling Mom, demanding an explanation. But what good would it do? She'd made her choices long ago. I decided then and there to let it go. I had a good life, a future ahead of me. I didn't need to dredge up old hurts. Little did I know, the past wasn't done with me yet. A few weeks later, as I was leaving work, my phone rang. I almost dropped it when I saw the caller ID. Mom. "Hello?" I answered, my voice uncertain. "Deborah? It's your mother." I waited, not sure what to say. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, her voice sounding different than I remembered. "I miss you, sweetheart. I want us to try and fix things between us. Can we meet?" I was speechless. After years of silence, this was the last thing I expected. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's meet." We agreed on a cafe near my office for the following Saturday. When I walked into the cafe, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman waving at me from a corner table looked nothing like the mother I remembered. Her face was taut and unnaturally smooth, her lips plump, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Years of surgeries had transformed her into someone I might have passed on the street without a second glance. We ordered coffee, and for a while, we made awkward small talk. She asked about my job. I asked about her life. It felt surreal, like I was having lunch with a stranger who happened to know details about my childhood. Finally, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Deborah, I owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually. I haven't been a good mother to you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "After your father died, I was lost. I made a lot of mistakes. I pushed you away when I should have held you close. Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at this woman, this stranger with my mother's eyes, and felt a complex swirl of emotions. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand explanations for years of neglect, for the money she'd kept from me. But another part, a part I thought had died long ago, just wanted my mom back. "I don't know," I said honestly. "It's been a long time, Mom. A lot has happened." She nodded, looking down at her coffee. "I understand, but I want to try, if you'll let me. I've missed so much of your life. I want to be part of it again, if you'll have me." The next few weeks were surreal. Mom and I met for coffee, went shopping, and even had dinner together a couple of times. It felt strange, like trying on an old sweater that didn't quite fit anymore, but I was cautiously optimistic. One afternoon, as we were finishing up lunch, Mom casually asked, "So, sweetie, did your grandparents leave you anything?" The question caught me off guard. Yeah," I replied hesitantly. "They left me their house and some savings." Mom's eyes lit up in a way that made me uneasy. "Oh, that's wonderful. You know, I've been meaning to ask you a favor." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm getting married again, to Daniel. You remember him, right? He's 16 years younger than me. We want to have a bachelorette party, and I was wondering if we could use your grandparents' house. It's such a lovely place for a celebration." I blinked, trying to process this information. "You're getting married? Again?" She waved her hand dismissively. Third time's the charm, right? So, about the house? Against my better judgment, I agreed. Sure, I guess that would be okay. Mom clapped her hands in delight. Oh, thank you, darling. You won't regret this. The next day, she came to pick up the keys. I'll give them back at the wedding, she said, handing me an ornate invitation. 1 month from today. I can't wait for you to be there. As I watched her drive away, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me was happy that Mom wanted me at her wedding. Another part couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. The weeks flew by, and I was busy with work and my own life. But as the wedding approached, I decided to check on the house, make sure everything was in order for Mom's party. As I pulled up to the curb, I noticed unfamiliar cars in the driveway. Frowning, I walked up to the front door and knocked. A stranger answered. "Can I help you?" he asked, looking confused. "I'm here to check on the house," I said. "I'm the owner." The man's frown deepened. "I think there's been a mistake. My wife and I just bought this house. We're in the middle of moving in." My heart dropped. "That's impossible. This house belongs to me. I inherited it from my grandparents." The man called his wife over, and they explained that they'd bought the house from a woman whose description matched my mother's new look perfectly. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Mom had done it again. She'd manipulated me, used me, all to steal my inheritance. I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing. How could she have sold the house? She didn't have the right, unless she'd forged documents. For a moment, I considered calling the police right then and there. But as the initial shock wore off, a cold anger settled in its place. No, I wouldn't go to the police. Not yet. Mom thought she'd won, that she'd pulled off her scheme without a hitch. She was expecting to celebrate her new marriage, to start her new life flush with the money from my grandparents' house. Well, she had another thing coming. The week leading up to Mom's wedding was a flurry of activity. I reached out to every relative I could think of, aunts, uncles, cousins, and told them everything. The fraudulent sale of the house, the years of neglect, the stolen college fund. To my relief, they were unanimously outraged. I outlined my plan, asking each of them to play along at the wedding, to act as if everything was normal until I gave the signal. They all agreed, eager to see justice served. The day of the wedding arrived. I dressed in a beautiful blue dress, my hair and makeup carefully done. To all outward appearances, I was the picture of a supportive daughter. The ceremony was lavish, clearly sparing no expense. My stomach churned, knowing that this extravagance was likely funded by the sale of my grandparents' home. When it came time for the reception, I waited patiently as guest after guest offered their congratulations. Finally, I approached the microphone, a serene smile plastered on my face. "I'd like to say a few words about my mother," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Then, with deliberate slowness, I reached into my purse and pulled out a white cap. The words, "My mother is a thief," blazed across it in bright red letters. I placed it on my head, and around the room, my relatives did the same. The silence was deafening. Mom's face drained of color as I continued. "Let me tell you a story," I said, my voice ringing out in the stunned quiet. A story about a woman who abandoned her child, who stole money meant for that child's education, and who, most recently, fraudulently sold a house she had no right to sell, a house left to her daughter by loving grandparents. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw Mom trying to signal me to stop, but I pressed on, recounting years of neglect and deception. And now, I concluded, she stands here, celebrating her wedding with money obtained through fraud, money stolen from her own daughter. The young groom, Daniel, turned to Mom, his face a mask of shock and disgust. "Sarah, is this true?" he demanded. Under the weight of dozens of accusing stares, Mom finally broke. "Yes," she wailed. "But I love you, Daniel. I'd do anything for you. Please, please don't leave me." She fell to her knees, clutching at Daniel's legs, mascara streaking down her face. The beautiful bride was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered woman. The wedding reception had devolved into utter chaos. Guests were shouting, some in anger, others in disbelief. Amidst the uproar, Mom suddenly sprang to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little rubbish!" she screamed at me, her voice raw with fury. "I should have aborted you when I had the chance. I wish you'd never been born." Her words hit me like a physical blow, but I stood my ground, watching as years of pent-up resentment and bitterness poured out of her. Daniel, who had been standing in shocked silence, finally found his voice. "That's enough," he said, his tone ice-cold. "Sarah, I can't believe I almost married you. You're a monster." With that, he turned on his heel and walked out, leaving Mom standing alone in her white dress, mascara streaking down her face. I took off my cap, the words "my mother is a thief" now seeming almost quaint compared to the ugly truth that had been revealed. With a final, deliberate motion, I threw it at her feet. "Goodbye, Mom," I said quietly, then turned and walked away, leaving her screaming and sobbing behind me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. I went straight to the police, filing charges against Mom for fraud and forgery. The case was solid. Between the forged documents, witness testimonies, and Mom's own confession at the wedding, there was no doubt about her guilt. In the end, justice was served. Mom was sentenced to several years in prison for her crimes. She was ordered to return the money from the fraudulent house sale and pay additional compensation for her years of deception. As I stood outside the courthouse after the final hearing, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, that the truth had finally come out. Sadness for the mother I never really had. But mostly, I felt free. Free from the weight of unspoken truths and suppressed anger that I'd carried for so long. With the money from the settlement, I bought myself a cozy little house, smaller than my grandparents', but all mine. I set aside the rest for the future, thinking about the family I hope to have someday. Life settled into a new rhythm. Work was going well, I was making new friends, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy and at peace. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Deborah?" A young man's voice came through. "It's Jake, your brother." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from Jake since we were kids. "I heard about what happened with Mom," he continued. I wanted to hear your side of the story, if that's okay." We talked for hours that night. Jake had been living with his dad since the divorce, shielded from most of Mom's antics. He was shocked by what I told him, but mostly, he seemed sad that we'd lost so many years together. From that day on, Jake and I started rebuilding our relationship. We met for coffee, exchanged texts, and slowly got to know each other as adults. It wasn't always easy. We had a lot of lost time to make up for, but it was worth it. As I sit here now, looking out the window of my new home, I can't help but reflect on the journey that brought me here. It wasn't an easy road, filled with betrayal, hurt, and loss. But it also led me to strength I didn't know I had, to justice long overdue, and to a brother I thought I'd lost. I'm Kristen, and until recently, I thought I had it all figured out. Tom and I had been married for 2 years, living in a beautiful apartment in a nice neighborhood. We both had good jobs. I worked at an advertising agency, and Tom headed sales at a sports nutrition company. Our plan was simple: save for a house, then start a family. We lived frugally, sharing one car. Every morning, Tom dropped me off at work before heading to his office. I'd make my own way home in the evenings. It wasn't always convenient, but we were determined. Then Tom's sister, Sarah, came to visit with her 2 kids. She was a single mom. Her husband had died in a car accident. Tom's parents, my in-laws, were super protective of her. They were always trying to make sure she didn't feel lonely, which is why they sent her to stay with us. When Sarah arrived, Tom was over the moon. "Isn't it great to have them here?" he said, helping with her bags. I nodded, trying to match his excitement. Sure, it'll be nice to spend time together. At first, I thought Tom's attention to Sarah and her kids was sweet. He played with the children, listened to Sarah's problems, and bent over backward to make them comfortable. As the days passed, Tom's focus on Sarah intensified. He started demanding that I put her needs first, too. Kristen, can you help Sarah with the kids' laundry? Or, why don't you take Sarah shopping? She needs to relax. I was exhausted from work and now had to cater to Sarah's every whim. The breaking point came when Tom said, Kristen, Sarah's going through a tough time. We need to make her stay as comfortable as possible. Can't you be more understanding? I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. Tom, I'm trying, but I'm tired too. I work all day, then come home to cook and clean for everyone. I need a break too. He frowned, clearly unhappy with my response. Sarah's a single mom. She needs our support. You should be more sympathetic. As I watched Tom fuss over Sarah and her kids, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. This wasn't just a visit anymore. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure I was going to like where it was heading. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah showed no signs of leaving. I was exhausted, both mentally and physically. After long days at the ad agency, I'd come home to cook for everyone and clean up the mess. Tom's constant criticism was wearing me down. Kristen, Sarah doesn't like spicy food. Can't you make something else? Tom complained one evening. I bit my tongue, fighting back tears of frustration. Tom, I'm doing my best. I'm tired too, you know. Sarah's with the kids all day. She's exhausted and has no time to cook, he shot back. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. I understand that, but... No buts, Kristen. We need to support her. I nodded silently, not wanting to start another argument. I got it. I really did. Sarah was going through a tough time, both mentally and physically. But I was tired of Tom's unfair reproaches. I couldn't wait for things to go back to normal. One evening, as I was scrubbing dishes after dinner, Tom dropped a bombshell. Kristen, we need to talk, he said, leaning against the counter. I dried my hands, bracing myself. What's up? Sarah's thinking of looking for a job here in the city, he said, a hint of excitement in his voice. I froze. Oh? That's unexpected. Yeah, isn't it great? But here's the thing, he continued, not noticing my discomfort. I think you should quit your job and take care of the kids in the house. The dish I was holding slipped from my hands, clattering in the sink. What? You can't be serious. Tom frowned. Of course I am. Sarah needs to work, and someone needs to watch the kids. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Tom, I'm not quitting my job to take care of someone else's children. That's not fair. Fair? What's not fair is expecting Sarah to manage everything on her own, he snapped. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Okay, let's think about this. Where is Sarah planning to live if she gets a job here? Before Tom could answer, Sarah walked into the kitchen, a smile on her face. Oh, didn't Tom tell you? I'll be living here, of course, with my amazing brother. He understands me, supports me. I couldn't ask for a better brother. I stared at Tom, my eyes demanding an explanation. He shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. Look, Kristen, can we discuss this later? He said quickly, avoiding eye contact. No, Tom, we need to talk about this now, I insisted, my voice trembling slightly. I'm not okay with this arrangement. We can't all live together. It's too cramped in this apartment for 5 people. Tom's face lit up, as if he'd just remembered something wonderful. But honey, don't you see? This is perfect. We were planning to buy a house anyway. Now we have even more reason to do it sooner. There'll be plenty of space for everyone. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Tom, that's not the point. We can't just... But he cut me off mid-sentence, his attention already elsewhere. Sorry, Kristen. We'll talk later. I promised the kids I'd play with them. And just like that, he was gone, leaving me standing in the kitchen, mouth agape, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. From that day on, everything changed. Tom stopped driving me to work, always with the same excuse. "Sorry, babe. I'm really busy this morning." I knew he was lying, but I couldn't prove it. So, I found myself commuting on my own, both morning and evening, adding extra stress to my already hectic days. One afternoon, I came home early from work, hoping to get a head start on dinner. Instead, I walked into chaos. Sarah was sprawled on the couch, eyes glued to some trashy reality show, while her kids ran wild. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "what's going on here?" She barely glanced up. "Oh, hi, Kristen. The kids were bored, so I let them play." I looked around in horror. The walls were covered in crayon scribbles. There were mysterious stains on the couch, and my beloved houseplants, the ones I'd nurtured for years, were knocked over, soil spilling across the floor. "This isn't playing, Sarah. This is destroying our home." I couldn't keep the frustration out of my voice. Sarah just shrugged, her eyes already back on the TV. "They're just kids, Kristen. Lighten up." I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head. "Sarah, I thought you were looking for a job. Have you had any luck?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I've sent my resume everywhere, but nothing good has come up yet. They all want too much work for too little pay. I'm not desperate, you know." I bit my tongue, holding back the retort that threatened to spill out. Of course she wasn't desperate. She had a free ride here, with Tom and me footing the bill and doing all the work. That night, as Tom and I got ready for bed, I tried one more time to talk sense into him. "Tom, we need to set some ground rules. Sarah can't just let the kids run wild like that, and she needs to start contributing to the household chores." Tom sighed, looking exasperated. "Kristen, Sarah's going through a tough time. Can't you cut her some slack?" "Slack? Tom, I've been cutting her slack for weeks. Our home is being destroyed. I'm doing all the work, and you're acting like I'm the unreasonable one here." "Keep your voice down," Tom hissed. "You'll wake everyone up. Look, I know it's not ideal, but it's family. We have to stick together." As I lay in bed that night, listening to Tom's soft snores, I couldn't help but wonder, when did I stop being part of this family? And more importantly, how much longer could I keep living like this? As days turned into weeks, the situation at home only worsened. Tom seemed oblivious to the chaos his sister and her kids were creating. Whenever I tried to establish some order or ask the kids to clean up after themselves, Sarah would run to Tom with complaints. "Tom," I overheard her one evening, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I don't think Kristen likes the children. She's always yelling at them, forcing them to clean. They're just kids, you know?" I waited for Tom to defend me, to point out that basic tidiness wasn't child abuse. Instead, I heard him sigh heavily. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'll talk to her." That night, Tom confronted me in our bedroom. "Look at this place, Kristen. It's a mess. If you can't keep it clean with the kids here, maybe..." "Maybe what, Tom?" I challenged, already knowing where this was going. "Maybe you should consider quitting your job. If you were home full-time, you could keep the house in order without putting so much pressure on the kids." I laughed bitterly. "So now it's child labor to ask kids to clean up after themselves?" "Tom, do you hear yourself?" But he wasn't listening. He'd been pushing this agenda for weeks now, and I was exhausted from fighting it. "You know what, Tom? Fine. You want me to quit?" I quit. His eyes widened in surprise. "Really? You mean it?" I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. "Yep, I'll call work tomorrow and tell them." Tom's face broke into a wide grin. He hugged me tightly, not noticing how stiff I was in his embrace. "Oh, Kristen, this is great. You'll see, everything will be better now." The next day, I did call work, but not to quit. I spoke with my boss and explained that I needed to take a 3-month unpaid leave for family reasons. Thankfully, I'd recently trained an intern who could cover for me. My boss was understanding and approved my request. When I told Tom I'd quit, he beamed with pride, shooting a triumphant look at Sarah. "See? I told you Kristen would come around. She understands the importance of family. As I watched them share their moment of victory, I felt like a stranger in my own home. But I reminded myself that this was temporary. 3 months. I'd given myself 3 months to see how this situation would play out, to see if Tom would realize the mistake he was making. The next morning, as Tom left for work, he kissed me on the cheek. "Have a great day at home, honey. I know you'll do a fantastic job." I forced a smile, waving as he drove away. Then I turned to face the mess that awaited me inside. Sarah was already on the couch, TV remote in hand, while her kids ran around, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. From the day I quit my job, my life transformed into an endless cycle of chores and childcare. I'd wake up at dawn, prepare breakfast for everyone, pack Tom's lunch, and then spend the rest of the day cleaning, cooking, and looking after Sarah's kids. Meanwhile, Sarah lived like she was on a perpetual vacation. Days blurred together in a haze of domestic duties. Sarah would swan out of the house, off to shop or meet friends for coffee, leaving her children in my care without so much as a backward glance. I'd watch her drive away in Tom's car, while I was left stranded at home, juggling housework and childcare. Tom, for his part, seemed oblivious to the imbalance. He'd come home, kiss me on the cheek, and ask, "How was your day, honey?" As if I'd chosen this life, as if I was living my dream instead of his sister's. One evening, as I was serving dinner, a meal I'd spent hours preparing while Sarah napped, Tom made an announcement. "So, Sarah's birthday is coming up next month," he said, grinning. "I've got something special planned." Sarah clapped her hands excitedly. "Ooh, do tell." Tom shook his head. "It's a surprise, but clear your schedule for the evening of the 15th. On the evening of Sarah's birthday, we all piled into Tom's car and headed to LeBlanc, the most expensive restaurant in town. It was the kind of place Tom and I used to dream about going for our anniversaries, but always decided the money would be better spent on our house fund. Tom's parents were already there when we arrived, cooing over Sarah and barely acknowledging my existence. As we settled into our seats, I couldn't help but feel like an outsider looking in on this family celebration. Throughout the meal, the conversation revolved around Sarah, her struggles, her strength, her dreams. I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate, feeling increasingly invisible. After the main course, Tom stood up, gently tapping his glass for attention. "I'd like to make a toast to my incredible sister, Sarah. You've been through so much, and you handle it all with such grace. I'm in awe of your strength." Sarah beamed, soaking in the praise. Tom continued, "And to celebrate your birthday, I have a special surprise." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. For a split second, my heart leaped. Was this all an elaborate ruse? Was he actually going to surprise me with a gift to thank me for my sacrifices? But then he turned to Sarah and held out the box. "Sarah, you've mentioned how hard it is getting around with the kids. So..." He opened the box, revealing a set of car keys. "Happy birthday, sis. Your very own car, just like you've always wanted." The table erupted in applause and exclamations of delight. Sarah jumped up, hugging Tom tightly. "Oh my God, Tom! I can't believe it. You're the best brother ever." I sat there, frozen in shock. A car. He had bought her a car. My mind flashed back to all the times I had mentioned needing a second car, all the times Tom had said we couldn't afford it, that we needed to save for our house. "Tom," I said, trying to keep my tone even, "can I ask why you bought such an expensive gift for Sarah?" The table fell silent, all eyes turning to us. Tom's smile faltered slightly. "Well, Sarah needs a car. She has 2 kids, and it's hard for her to get them to the park or the doctor. Plus, she'll need it when she starts working soon." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "And what about me? I've been asking for a second car for months." Tom's expression hardened. "You're at home all day, Kristen. You don't need a car." The injustice of it all hit me like a physical blow. "How much did this car cost, Tom?" He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. $20,000. The room started to spin. 20,000? Where did you get that kind of money? Tom cleared his throat. I took it from our joint account, but don't worry, I'll put it back as soon as I get my bonus at work. Something inside me snapped. You took our savings without even discussing it with me? That was our house fund, Tom. I want you to return that money right now. Kristen, Tom's mother gasped. How can you be so selfish? Your sister-in-law needs this car. But I was beyond caring about their opinions. Years of frustration poured out of me. Selfish? I've given up everything for this family. My job, my dreams, my identity. Tom's face was red with anger. If you're going to be so greedy and inflexible, fine. I'll take out a loan and put the money back in our account. Happy now? No, I shouted, beyond caring about the scene we were causing. I don't want you taking out a loan. I want you to sell the car and put our savings back where they belong. Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. See, Tom? I told you she was controlling. She's trying to make you henpecked. Tom's parents nodded in agreement. Kristen, his father said sternly, you need to learn your place. Tom is the head of the household. I felt like I was drowning, surrounded by people who didn't see me as a person, just an accessory to their perfect family narrative. Tom stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. That's enough, Kristen. You've ruined everyone's evening with your behavior. Don't you know how to act in public? Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I stood up, grabbing my purse. I'm leaving. Good, Tom shouted, no longer caring about the other restaurant patrons staring at us. Get out! You ungrateful freeloader. I'm the one who earns the money in this family, and you should be obeying me. Maybe if you got a job, you'd have a right to an opinion. His words hit me like physical blows. I wanted to scream that I hadn't actually quit my job, that I was on leave, but the words stuck in my throat. What was the point? They'd already made up their minds about who I was. As I walked out of the restaurant, I could hear Tom continuing his tirade. She lives off my hard work and then has the audacity to question my decisions. Can you believe it? The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, tears finally spilling over. I had never felt so humiliated, so angry, so done. I arrived at our apartment, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The nanny looked up in surprise as I burst in, tear-stained and disheveled. I went to our bedroom and pulled out my suitcase. With mechanical movements, I began packing my clothes, toiletries, and a few precious mementos. I left a note for Tom, brief and to the point. I'm staying at a hotel. Don't try to contact me. The hotel room was small and impersonal, but it felt like a sanctuary. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling the weight of expectations and disappointment crushing me. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, replaying the evening's events in my mind. By morning, I knew what I had to do. As soon as the law offices opened, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney. Sarah Garcia came highly recommended, known for her fair but firm approach. Mrs. Johnson, she said, shaking my hand, tell me what brings you here today. I poured out my story, the gradual erosion of my marriage, the financial betrayal, the public humiliation. Sarah listened attentively, taking notes. Based on what you've told me, she said when I finished, you have a strong case for divorce. Your husband's actions with the joint account are particularly concerning. Let's draft the initial paperwork. Over the next few days, I threw myself into creating a new life. I found a small apartment, not far from my office. I called my boss and explained the situation, asking to end my leave early. She was understanding and welcomed me back with open arms. As I settled into my new routine, I hoped for an amicable divorce. I wasn't out for revenge. I just wanted what was fair. I suggested mediation to Tom, thinking it would be the quickest and least painful way to end things. I'm not asking for much, I told him during our first session. Just return the money you spent on Sarah's car, and we'll split the remaining joint account 50-50. Tom scoffed. Return the money? That car was a gift to my sister. You're being ridiculous. The mediator tried to intervene, but it was clear Tom wasn't budging. After 3 fruitless sessions, I realized we'd have to go to court. The next few months were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and court appearances. Tom fought me every step of the way, painting me as a gold digger trying to rob his poor sister of her much-needed vehicle. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge made her ruling. The court finds that Mr. Johnson's use of joint funds to purchase a vehicle for his sister, without the consent of his spouse, was illegal. Mr. Johnson is ordered to reimburse Mrs. Johnson for half the value of the vehicle, as well as legal fees. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't about the money. It was about justice, about having my voice heard and my rights recognized. Tom's face was a mask of fury as we left the courthouse. "I hope you're happy," he spat. "You've gotten your pound of flesh, you greedy, petty woman." Over the next few weeks, Tom complied with the court order, transferring the money to my account. I later learned he'd had to take out a loan to cover it, but I couldn't bring myself to feel guilty. He'd made his choices, and now we both had to live with the consequences. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I had settled into a comfortable routine. My small apartment had become a haven, filled with peace and the simple joys I'd forgotten during my tumultuous marriage. I'd rekindled old friendships, thrown myself into my work, and even started a small herb garden on my balcony. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I heard an unexpected knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I approached cautiously and peered through the peephole. My heart skipped a beat when I saw Tom standing there, looking disheveled and anxious. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home, but curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door. "Kristen," Tom said, his voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He looked around my apartment, taking in the cozy, organized space. "You look good," he said softly. "The place looks nice." "Thanks," I replied, my guard up. "What brings you here, Tom?" He sank onto my couch, running his hands through his hair. I messed up, Kristen. I see that now. I came to apologize and, well, to ask for your help." I sat in the armchair across from him, waiting silently for him to continue. "I lost my job," he blurted out. "The company downsized, and I was let go. I'm still paying off the loan for Sarah's car, and I'm barely making ends meet. Sarah, she refuses to sell the car or get a job. Says she's not ready yet." A part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction at hearing this, but I pushed it aside. "I'm sorry to hear that, Tom, but I'm not sure how I can help." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "The apartment is a disaster. Sarah doesn't clean, and the kids are out of control. The landlord's threatening to evict us because of the noise and mess. I realize now that you were right about everything. Sarah's not just going through a rough patch, she's taking advantage. And I let her." I sat there, taking in his words. The vindication I felt was bittersweet. Yes, I had been right. But at what cost? "Kristen," Tom continued, his voice breaking, "I know I don't deserve it, but I was hoping maybe we could start over. I've learned my lesson. I miss you, miss us. Maybe with your help, we could fix things." For a moment, I was transported back to the early days of our marriage. The love, the dreams we shared, the future we'd planned together. But then I remembered the betrayal, the humiliation, the months of feeling invisible and unvalued. I took a deep breath. "Tom, I appreciate your apology, and I'm sorry you're going through a tough time. But I can't go back." His face fell. "But Kristen, I've changed. I see things clearly now." I shook my head gently. "The thing is, Tom, I've changed too. These past few months have shown me what I'm capable of, what I deserve. If you betrayed me once, who's to say you wouldn't do it again when things get tough?" "I wouldn't," he insisted. "I've learned my lesson." "Maybe you have," I conceded, "but that doesn't change the fact that I'm happier now. I've found freedom in being on my own, in making my own choices without having to consider a partner who doesn't value my input. Tom's shoulders slumped. So that's it? There's no chance for us? I stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. I think it's best if you go, Tom. I truly hope things get better for you, but I'm not the solution to your problems. You need to stand on your own 2 feet and make your own choices. He nodded slowly, getting to his feet. At the door, he turned to me one last time. I really am sorry, Kristen, for everything. I know, I said softly. Goodbye, Tom. As I closed the door behind him, I leaned against it, letting out a long breath. A mix of emotions swirled within me. Sadness for the dreams we'd once shared, a touch of schadenfreude at Tom's comeuppance, but most of all, an overwhelming sense of relief and freedom. I'm Carla, and this is my story. After college, I dove headfirst into the working world. My parents had drummed it into my head since I was knee-high. Kids gotta stand on their own 2 feet. So there I was, fresh diploma in hand, hustling to find a job while my classmates were still nursing hangovers from grad parties. Landed a decent gig at a marketing firm. Nothing flashy, but it paid the bills. Found a tiny apartment too, more of a shoebox with a kitchenette, really. But it was mine, and that meant something. Meanwhile, my kid sister Lily, she was still living it up at home, not a care in the world. Mom and Dad fawned over her, like she was the second coming or something. Lily doesn't need to work, Mom would say, stroking my sister's perfect blonde hair. She's got her looks. That's her gift to the world. Don't get me wrong, I love Lily. But Christ, the difference in how we were raised. It was like night and day. I was pushed to study, get good grades, prepare for a career. Lily? She was told she was pretty. That was enough, apparently. One time, I overheard Dad talking to Lily. Sweetheart, you don't need to worry about college or jobs. Just focus on your beauty pageants. That's your future. Lily ate it up, of course. Why wouldn't she? She'd been in those damn pageants since she could walk. Wanted to be a model, she said. Until she found out models actually had to, work. Wait, they have to diet, and exercise, and learn languages? Lily had whined. That sounds hard. I don't want to do that. So instead, she just existed, at home, on our parents' dime. Me? I was busting my ass at work, pinching pennies, building up a little nest egg. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I'd earned it. I tried not to let it get to me, how different things were for us. But some nights, alone in my crappy apartment, eating microwave dinners and going over budget spreadsheets, yeah, it stung a bit. But that was life, right? Some people get the easy road, some don't. I told myself I was stronger for it, more prepared for the real world. If only I'd known what was coming. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. Just a regular Tuesday. I remember because I'd treated myself to takeout, a rare splurge. I was sitting on my secondhand couch, trying to ignore the springs digging into my back, when my phone rang. Mom's voice on the phone was shaky. Carla, honey, you need to come home. It's your father. He's had a stroke. We need your help. The drive to my parents' house was a blur of streetlights and worry. When I arrived, Mom looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Dad was in the hospital, stable, but weak. I can't do this alone, Carla, Mom said, clutching my hand. I'm working overtime to cover the medical bills. Can you help with your father's care? Of course, I agreed. What else could I do? I started sending money for a nurse and spending my weekends at my parents' house. It was exhausting, juggling work and family responsibilities, but I managed. Then came the kicker. Carla, Mom said one Sunday evening as I was packing up to head back to my apartment. Why don't you move back home for a few months? It would save us the nurse fees and you'd be here all the time. I had my doubts. Big ones. But looking at Mom's exhausted face and thinking of Dad in his hospital bed, I caved. Okay, Mom, I'll do it. So I packed up my little apartment, said goodbye to my neighbors, and moved back into my childhood bedroom. It felt surreal, like stepping back in time. The commute to work was a nightmare. An hour and a half each way if traffic was kind. But I gritted my teeth and bore it. This was for Dad, I reminded myself. Dad came home from the hospital a week after I moved back. He was frail, a shadow of his former self. But when he saw me, his face lit up. "My girl," he said, his words slurred but warm. "You're here." Those moments made it worth it. The gratitude in Dad's eyes, the way he'd squeeze my hand when I helped him with his exercises or brought him his meals. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. Mom, on the other hand, that was a different story. Nothing I did seemed to be enough for her. If I cooked, the food was too bland. If I cleaned, I missed a spot. If I spent an extra 5 minutes talking to Dad, I was neglecting my other chores. "Carla, I asked you to do the laundry hours ago," she'd snap. "And have you changed your father's sheets yet?" I bit my tongue, reminding myself that Mom was under a lot of stress. She was working long hours, worried sick about Dad, trying to keep everything together. But still, her constant criticism wore me down. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, followed by hours of household chores, I collapsed onto my bed, utterly exhausted. "Carla!" Mom's shrill voice cut through my moment of peace. "I need you to help your father with his bath." I dragged myself up, ignoring the protest of my aching muscles. As I helped Dad into the bathroom, he patted my hand. "You're a good girl, Carla," he said softly. "Don't know what we'd do without you." I smiled, feeling a lump in my throat. This was why I was here. This was what mattered. But later that night, as I lay in bed listening to Mom complain to someone on the phone about how Carla just doesn't seem to understand how much help we need, I couldn't help but wonder, why am I the only one trying to please everyone? As the days blurred together in an endless cycle of work and caregiving, I couldn't help but notice the glaring absence of my sister, Lily. While I was running myself ragged, Lily was living her best life, untouched by the family crisis. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of her swanning out the front door, designer handbag swinging from her arm. "Where are you off to?" I called out, elbow deep in dishwater. Lily tossed her hair over her shoulder. "Oh, just meeting the girls for mani-pedis and lunch. Don't wait up." The door slammed behind her, leaving me in stunned silence. I looked down at my prune-like fingers, then at the mountain of chores still waiting for me. The contrast was so stark it was almost laughable. But the worst part? Lily's complete disregard for Dad's condition. She couldn't even bear to be in the same room when I was feeding him. I'd see her wrinkle her nose and dash off to her bedroom, plate in hand, muttering something about not having the stomach for it. One particularly grueling day, after a hellish commute and hours of overtime, I dragged myself home to find Mom in a state. "Carla, where have you been? Your father needs his dinner." I bit back a retort about having to work to pay for said dinner, and quietly went about preparing Dad's meal. As I spooned pureed vegetables into his mouth, careful not to spill a drop, an idea struck me. "Mom," I said cautiously, "have you considered maybe sending Dad to a specialized care facility?" Just for a while. The spoon clattered to the floor as Mom whirled on me, eyes blazing. "How dare you!" she shrieked. "Your own father, after everything we've done for you." "Mom, please listen. They have professionals there. They could help Dad recover faster, maybe even—" "Ungrateful!" Mom cut me off. "I knew it. You just don't want to help us. Well, let me tell you something, Missy. You'll do as I say in this house. If you can't handle it, there's the door." I stayed. I worked. I cooked. I cleaned. I cared for Dad. Every paycheck went straight into Mom's hands, ostensibly for household expenses and medical bills. I was back to being a teenager, asking for an allowance to buy necessities. One evening, as I was scrubbing the kitchen floor, I heard Lily's tinkling laugh from the living room. She was sprawled on the couch, FaceTiming with friends, planning their next shopping spree. "Oh my God, you have to see these shoes I bought today," she gushed. "They cost a fortune, but Daddy's credit card can handle it." I scrubbed harder, my knuckles turning white around the brush handle. Daddy's credit card. The same daddy who couldn't feed himself. The same daddy whose medical bills I was helping to pay. It was well past midnight when the front door banged open, startling me awake. I'd fallen asleep on the couch, a half-folded basket of laundry at my feet. Lily's high-pitched giggle echoed through the house, accompanied by a deeper, unfamiliar laugh. "Don't laugh so loud, you'll wake everyone up," Lily stage whispered, not sounding particularly concerned. I rubbed my eyes, squinting at the clock. 2:37 a.m. Great. Lily stumbled into the living room, dragging a tall, scruffy-looking guy behind her. "Oh, Carla!" she exclaimed, as if surprised to find me in my own home. "You're up!" "Meet Brad." Brad gave me a lazy salute. "Sup?" Before I could respond, Lily thrust her left hand in my face. A gaudy diamond ring glittered on her finger. "We're engaged!" she squealed. "Oh, and Brad's moving in. Hope that's cool." I stood there, speechless, as Lily dragged her new fiancé upstairs, leaving me with the echo of her giggles and the faint smell of alcohol. The next morning, I stumbled into the kitchen to find Mom fawning over Lily and Brad. "Oh, sweetie, I'm so happy for you," she gushed, refilling Brad's coffee cup. "You make such a handsome couple." I quietly poured myself some coffee, trying to make sense of this new development. Mom turned to me, her smile fading slightly. "You know, Carla, you should start thinking about settling down, too. You're not getting any younger." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Mom, I'm focusing on my career right now, and helping out here, remember?" Mom's eyes narrowed. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "Well, it's not like you have many options anyway. Who'd want such an ugly duckling?" The words hit me like a slap. I was used to Mom's backhanded comments, but this, in front of Brad? I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. Lily snickered, and Brad looked uncomfortable, suddenly very interested in his coffee mug. I took a deep breath, trying to change the subject. "So, where exactly is Brad going to stay?" "The house is pretty full already, with Dad's medical equipment and all." Lily's eyes flashed. "What's that supposed to mean? You don't want us here?" "No, that's not," I started, but Lily cut me off. "God, Carla, you're so jealous. Just because you can't find a man doesn't mean you have to rain on my parade." I gaped at her. "Jealous? Lily, I'm just trying to be practical. Dad needs—" "Oh, enough about Dad," Lily snapped. "Everything's always about Dad with you. Maybe if you focused on yourself a little more, you wouldn't be so bitter and alone." "Girls, please," Mom interjected, but her stern look was directed solely at me. "Carla, mind your own business. Your sister is happy, and that's what matters." I stood there, stunned into silence. My own business? Wasn't this my business too? This was my home, my family. But looking at the three of them, Mom, Lily, and Brad, I suddenly felt like an outsider. As I got dressed, I could hear them laughing and chatting downstairs. The happy family. And where did I fit in? The ugly duckling, the bitter spinster, the ungrateful daughter. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, life decided to prove me wrong. Dad suffered another stroke, more severe than the first. This time, he was left almost completely paralyzed. He could still speak, but his words were slurred, barely comprehensible. It broke my heart to see him struggle. With Dad's condition worsening, I hoped, foolishly it turned out, that Lily might step up, that she'd finally realize the gravity of the situation and lend a hand. Boy, was I wrong. "Sorry, sis," Lily said, not sounding sorry at all. "Brad and I are trying to build a life together. We don't have time for all this." She waved her hand dismissively towards Dad's room. I couldn't believe my ears. "Build a life together? Lily, you're living in our parents' house, off their money and my income. The least you could do is help out." Lily's face hardened. "Don't be such a bitch, Carla. It's not our fault Dad got sick." "Girls!" Mom's sharp voice cut through our argument. "That's enough. Lily, dear, don't worry about it. You focus on your relationship. Carla can handle things here. I turned to Mom, incredulous. Are you serious? Mom, they're not even working. They're just freeloading. Mom's eyes flashed dangerously. Carla, how dare you? Brad isn't even related to your father. He has no obligation to help, and you should be grateful you can help your family. Some daughter you are, complaining about caring for your own father. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, mouth agape, as Mom stormed off, Lily smirking behind her. From that day on, life in the house became unbearable. I'd come home from work, exhausted, only to find Lily and Brad blasting music, laughing and carrying on as if it was their own private party pad. They'd leave their mess everywhere, dirty dishes in the sink, clothes strewn about, empty beer bottles on every surface. And the food. God, the food! I'd spend my Sundays meal prepping, trying to get ahead for the week. But come Monday, all my carefully prepared containers would be empty. More than once, I found myself at work with nothing to eat, my lunch devoured by Lily and Brad's midnight munchies. I tried talking to Mom about it multiple times, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Mom, please, I begged one evening, after finding yet another empty fridge. Can't you talk to Lily? This isn't fair. They're just existing at our expense. Not everyone is like you, Carla, Mom snapped. Not everyone can be Miss Independent, working themselves to the bone. Lily's still finding herself. If you're so concerned about money, maybe you should pick up some overtime. I stared at her, disbelief warring with fury in my chest. Overtime? Mom, I'm already working 60-hour weeks. I'm taking care of Dad, running the household, and apparently feeding 4 adults on my salary alone. When exactly am I supposed to sleep? Mom waved off my concerns. You're young. You can handle it. Now stop obsessing over your sister and focus on your own responsibilities. I walked away from that conversation feeling like I'd stepped into the twilight zone. How had this become my life? When had I become the bad guy for expecting basic decency and contribution from my own family? The days blurred together in an endless cycle of work, chores, and caregiving. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained. More and more, I found myself daydreaming about my old life, my tiny apartment, the blessed silence, the freedom. God, how I missed it. One night, after a particularly trying day, I broached the subject with Mom. Mom, I've been thinking, I started cautiously. Maybe we should consider hiring a nurse again. I could move back to my place, but still help out financially and visit often. Mom's face crumpled. How can you even suggest that? After everything we've done for you. I blinked, taken aback. Everything you've done for me? You're so heartless, Carla, Mom wailed, tears springing to her eyes. How can you abandon your father like this? It's your duty to help us. Your duty! Guilt washed over me, dousing my resolve like a bucket of cold water. I'd never been good at standing up to Mom's tears. I'm sorry, I mumbled. You're right, I'll stay. And so I did. I stayed and I helped, and I endured, until the day everything changed. I came home from work, bone-tired as usual, to find Lily lounging in the hallway, a self-satisfied smirk on her face. Oh, good, you're home, she chirped. I've got a surprise for you. Alarm bells rang in my head. Lily's surprises were never good news for me. She led me to my room, or what used to be my room. I stood in the doorway, shocked into silence. All my things were gone, replaced by racks of clothes, shoes, and makeup. My bedroom had been transformed into a walk-in closet. What is this? I finally managed to sputter. Lily beamed. Isn't it great? Now I have space for all my things. But where are my things? Where am I supposed to sleep? Lily's smile turned condescending. Oh, don't worry. We put your stuff in some boxes in the garage. You can sleep on the couch in the living room. I mean, you're basically the help now, right? You don't need a whole room. Something in me snapped. For the first time in my life, I saw red. I stormed into the kitchen where Mom was preparing dinner. Mom! I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. Did you know about this? Lily's taken over my room. She says I have to sleep on the couch. Mom barely looked up from her cooking. Yes, dear. Lily needs the space for her things. You'll be fine on the couch. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Fine on the couch? Mom, I live here too. I work here. I take care of Dad. I run this household. And now I don't even get a room? Mom sighed, like I was being particularly difficult. Carla, your sister deserves a nice dressing room. You're barely here anyway, always at work. The couch will do just fine. I stood there, trembling with anger and disbelief. Then a thought struck me. Dad. Dad would understand. Dad would take my side. I marched to his room, Mom trailing behind me. Dad was propped up in bed, his eyes following our movement. Dad, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Lily's taken over my room. She and Mom say I have to sleep on the couch now. After everything I've done, all the care I've given you, they're treating me like I don't even live here. I waited for Dad to protest, to defend me, to show some appreciation for all I'd sacrificed. Instead, he smiled weakly and said in his slurred speech, It's okay, Carla. Lily needs the space. You're a good girl. You understand. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Mom nodded approvingly. See? She said. Your father agrees. Besides, you're only here temporarily. Once he's better, you'll move out again anyway. I stood there, frozen in disbelief. The shock of my father's words, my mother's casual dismissal of my feelings, it all crashed over me like a tidal wave. In that moment, something inside me shattered. Without a word, I turned on my heel and marched out of Dad's room. I could hear Mom calling after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My feet carried me to the garage, where I found my life unceremoniously packed away in cardboard boxes. My hands were shaking as I started pulling out suitcases, shoving clothes and personal items inside. I didn't bother folding anything. I just needed to get out. Carla? Carla, what are you doing? Mom's voice cut through the haze of my fury. I didn't look up from my packing. What does it look like I'm doing? I'm leaving. Don't be ridiculous, Mom snapped. You can't leave. Your father needs you. We need you. I barked out a laugh, harsh and humorless. Oh, you need me all right. You need my money. You need my labor. But you don't need me. Not the real me. Stop being so dramatic, Mom said, her voice rising. I forbid you to leave this house. That made me pause. I straightened up, looking my mother in the eye. Forbid me? I'm an adult, Mom. You can't forbid me to do anything. I'm not sleeping on a couch like some beggar in my own home. I'm done being your personal maid and ATM. I'm done with the ingratitude, the disrespect, all of it. Mom's face paled. But your father, you can't abandon him like this. Maybe you could rent an apartment nearby? You could still come over to help, to cook and clean. I stared at her, incredulous. Even now, she was still trying to use me. No, I said, my voice firm. No, I won't be doing that. I'm done helping. I'm done communicating. I'm just done. I shouldered past her, dragging my suitcase behind me. As I reached the front door, I turned back one last time. And Lily? Your precious baby girl who can do no wrong? She's a leech, and you're letting her bleed you dry. But that's your problem now, not mine. Mom's face contorted with rage. How dare you? After everything we've done for you, you ungrateful little... I slammed the door, cutting off her tirade. My hand was shaking as I pulled out my phone and called a cab. As I waited on the front step, suitcase by my side, I could hear Mom's muffled shouts through the door. Scoundrel! Ingrate! How could you do this to your family? Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Was this really what family was supposed to be? The cab pulled up, and I loaded my suitcase into the trunk. As we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to see the house that had once been my home, the place where I'd given everything only to be treated like nothing. I found a small studio apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That first night, sleeping on a hastily purchased air mattress, I felt a weight lift off my chest. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. I was scrolling through social media on my lunch break when I saw it. A post from Mom. There was Dad, looking frail in his hospital bed. The caption made my blood run cold. "Pray for us. Our eldest daughter has cruelly abandoned us in our time of need. How could she do this to her dying father?" The comments flooded in, relatives and family friends expressing shock and disgust at my supposed heartlessness. I felt sick, but then something snapped. Enough was enough. I wrote my own post, laying out the whole ugly truth. The months of thankless labor, the financial drain, Lily's freeloading, the room theft. "I never wanted it to come to this," I wrote, "but I won't be painted as the villain in someone else's story." The response was immediate. The tide of public opinion turned. Suddenly, I was flooded with messages of support, apologies from those who'd been quick to judge. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, I just felt tired. Weeks passed. I threw myself into work, trying to rebuild my savings. But guilt nagged at me. Had I done the right thing? Should I have stayed, no matter the cost to myself? Then, the call came. Dad had passed away. "This is your fault," Mom spat through the phone. "Don't you dare show your face at the funeral." I didn't. I sat in my apartment, alternating between tears and numbness, mourning not just my father, but the family I'd lost long before his death. Time marched on. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. I worked hard, saved every penny. Finally, I had enough for a down payment on a small, cozy apartment of my own. No more renting, no more instability. I was building my own future, brick by brick. And then, another call. Mom's voice, older now, tinged with desperation. "Carla, we need your help. We had to sell the house, Lily's debts, and Brad left her. We have nowhere to go. Can we stay with you? Just until we get back on our feet?" I closed my eyes, memories washing over me. The sleepless nights, the thankless days, the constant demands, the casual cruelty. "No," I said, my voice calm and firm. "I'm sorry, but no. Please don't call again." I ended the call, my hand shaking slightly as I set down the phone. For a moment, I sat there, half expecting guilt to overwhelm me. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt peace. The peace of knowing my worth. The peace of setting boundaries. The peace of choosing myself.
My name's Eva, and I grew up in what you might call an ordinary family. But let me tell you, there was nothing ordinary about how things played out. From the day I was born, I was the second fiddle in my parents' orchestra. My older brother, Tom, was their golden child, the apple of their eye. They had big dreams for him. He was going to take over our family's Chinese porcelain business and make it big. Me? I was just there. Tom got all the attention, all the praise, all the newest gadgets. Latest iPhone? Tom had it. Newest gaming console? Tom's. Cool party invitation? Tom's going. Me? I was lucky if I got Tom's hand-me-downs or a babysitter for the night. Now, don't get me wrong. I didn't hate my parents or even Tom. I just didn't understand them. They were always trying to be something they weren't: richer, smarter, more important. It was all about appearances with them. "Eva, stand up straight," Mom would hiss at family gatherings. "And for goodness sake, smile. What will people think?" I'd plaster on a fake smile and count the minutes until I could escape to my room. The only bright spot in all this was my grandparents, Mom's parents. They lived in a cozy little house across town, and visiting them was like stepping into another world. With them, I felt seen, loved. It was the only place I felt I could truly be myself. When Tom graduated high school, it was a big to-do. My parents threw a lavish party, invited all their important friends, and announced proudly that Tom would be attending some fancy-pants college they'd handpicked for him. "Our boy's going places," Dad boasted, clapping Tom on the back. He'll make the family proud. Tom went to college, and I stayed at home. It's been a few years and I researched schools, picked out a program I was passionate about. All I had to do was tell my parents. The next day, I gathered my courage and approached them at breakfast. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice shaking a little. "I've decided on the college I want to attend." They looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "College," Dad scoffed. "You?" Mom laughed, a high, fake sound that set my teeth on edge. "Oh, Eva, don't be silly. You don't need college, you'll work in the shop with us." "But I want to study," I started, but Dad cut me off. "We're not wasting money on your education," he said firmly. "That money's going towards Tom's new car." I stood there, shocked into silence. Then Mom delivered the final blow. "Face it, Eva," she said, not unkindly, but with a patronizing smile. "You're just not college material, you'll be much happier in the shop." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. All my dreams, all my hard work, meant nothing to them. I ran from the room, tears streaming down my face, and did the only thing I could think of. I called my grandparents. Tears streaming down my face, I could barely get the words out. "Grandma, they said I'm not college material," I sobbed into the phone. There was a moment of silence, then Grandpa's voice came on the line, firm and angry. "Pack your bags, Eva, we're coming to get you." An hour later, I was throwing clothes into a suitcase when my parents burst into my room. "What do you think you're doing?" Mom demanded. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice shaky but determined. Dad scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. Where would you go?" Just then, the doorbell rang. I heard Grandpa's booming voice downstairs, and a wave of relief washed over me. "She's coming with us," Grandpa said as he appeared in my doorway, Grandma right behind him. "Now wait just a minute," Dad started, but Grandpa cut him off. "Eva's 18. She can live wherever she damn well pleases," he growled, "and right now she pleases to live with us." Mom tried to argue, but I was already hauling my suitcase down the stairs. As we drove away, I watched my childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror. I thought I'd feel sad, but all I felt was free. That night, over a home-cooked dinner, my grandparents laid out their plan. "We've been saving for years," Grandma said, reaching for my hand. "We always knew you were destined for great things, Eva. We want to pay for your college." And just like that, my life changed. I enrolled in the college of my dreams, ready to tackle whatever came my way. Every month, without fail, a small amount of money would appear in my account for accommodation, the note always said. I threw myself into my studies with a passion I never knew I had. Late nights in the library, heated debates in class, projects that challenged me in ways I'd never been challenged before. I loved every minute of it. One day, after presenting a particularly difficult project, my professor pulled me aside. "Eva, I'm impressed," she said, a rare smile on her usually stern face. "How would you like to intern at Stellar Corp this summer?" My jaw dropped. Stellar Corp was the most prestigious company in the city. Everyone wanted to work there. Are you serious?" I stammered. She nodded. "I'm recommending you personally. Don't let me down." I practically floated out of the classroom. Me, Eva, the girl who was not college material, landing an internship at Stellar Corp. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The future was wide open, and I was ready to grab it with both hands. I was in my third year of college when the unexpected call came. My older brother Tom had already graduated and landed a job. He'd been bragging about some big promotion, and now my parents, who had hardly spoken to me in years, suddenly wanted me to come home to share in Tom's success. I spent the next few days debating whether to go. Part of me wanted to stay away, to protect the life I'd built for myself. But another part, well, maybe things had changed. Maybe they finally saw me differently. In the end, I decided to go. What's the worst that could happen, right? I arrived at my old house on Friday evening, feeling like a stranger as I walked up the familiar driveway. Mom answered the door, all smiles and air kisses. I'd just finished unpacking when I heard the front door open, and Tom's voice drift up the stairs. "Mom, Dad, we're here." Curious, I headed downstairs. Tom was standing in the living room, his arm around a pretty blonde girl I'd never seen before. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Sarah," Tom announced, beaming, "my fiancée." Mom let out a squeal that could have shattered glass, while Dad pumped Tom's hand enthusiastically. I stood on the sidelines, feeling like an outsider at a party I hadn't been invited to. "It's nice to meet you," I said to Sarah, who smiled warmly at me. "You must be Eva. Tom's told me so much about you." I doubted that, but I appreciated the effort. As we all sat down, the story came out. Tom and Sarah had been dating all through college, and now that they'd graduated, they'd decided to tie the knot. "So Sarah," Mom said, leaning forward eagerly, "tell us about your family. What do your parents do?" Sarah smiled. "Oh, they're in business. They own a chain of high-end boutiques across the country." I swear I could see dollar signs light up in my parents' eyes. Dad puffed up like a peacock. "Well, we're thrilled to welcome you to the family," he declared. "Now about the wedding. I think we should spare no expense. In fact, I'd be happy to cover half the cost myself." I nearly choked on my drink. Half the wedding costs? This from the man who wouldn't spend a dime on my college education. "That's very generous," Sarah said, looking a bit uncomfortable. "But really, there's no need." "Nonsense," Dad boomed. "We want this to be the event of the season. Nothing but the best for my son and his bride." I caught Tom's eye across the room. He looked embarrassed? Uncomfortable? It was hard to tell. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. As the evening wore on, the wedding plans grew more and more extravagant. A 5-star venue, gourmet catering, designer dresses. My parents were going all out to impress Sarah's family. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of raised voices downstairs. Groaning, I dragged myself out of bed and crept down the stairs, curious about what new drama was unfolding. Tom and Sarah were standing in the living room, a sleek folder in Sarah's hands. My parents sat on the couch, looking confused. "What do you mean?" another city Dad was saying, his face turning an alarming shade of red. Sarah opened the folder, revealing glossy photos of a stunning beach resort. "We've always dreamed of a destination wedding," she explained, her voice excited. "Look at this place, it's perfect." I watched as my father's eyes bulged at the price list Sarah handed him. This is ridiculous," he spluttered. "It's 3 times what we discussed." "But Dad," Tom argued, "you said you wanted the best. This is the best." Dad stood up, his fists clenched. "I meant the best in our hometown, where our friends can attend. Who's going to travel across the country for your wedding?" "Our friends will," Sarah said softly, looking hurt. The argument escalated quickly. Dad insisted on a local wedding, while Tom and Sarah stood their ground on the destination plan. I stood in the corner, feeling like I was watching a tennis match, my head swiveling back and forth between the two sides. Finally, Dad exploded. "Enough. It's either a wedding here the way I want it, or you're on your own." The room fell silent. Tom's face hardened, a look I'd never seen before. "Fine," he said coldly, "we'll do it on our own." With that, he grabbed Sarah's hand and stormed out, slamming the door behind them. Dad collapsed onto the couch, his face in his hands. Mom fluttered around him, murmuring soothing words. I stood there awkwardly, not sure what to do. I'm going to head back to college," I said quietly. Neither of them responded. I packed my bags and left, grateful to escape the tension-filled house. Back at college, I threw myself into my studies, trying to forget the family drama. Weeks turned into months and life went on. I was deep into my final project when I got the call that changed everything. "Is this Eva Thompson?" a formal voice asked. "Yes, that's me," I replied, my heart racing. "This is Mr. Johnson from Johnson Associates law firm. I'm afraid I have some bad news. Your grandparents, Robert and Margaret Thompson, were in a car accident 3 days ago. I'm sorry to inform you that they didn't survive." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My grandparents. Gone? It couldn't be true. They were the only ones who had ever truly believed in me, supported me. And now... Miss Thompson, the lawyer's voice brought me back to reality. There's something else we need to discuss. Your grandparents will. I listened in a daze as Mr. Johnson explained that I was the sole beneficiary. My grandparents had left me everything, their cozy house, their savings, everything. I sat on my bed after the call ended, trying to process it all. Grief for my grandparents warred with disbelief over my inheritance. I was now the owner of a house and had a substantial amount of money in the bank. The dust had barely settled on my grandparents' funeral when the vultures started circling. I was still trying to process my grief when Tom showed up at my door, all smiles and fraternal love. "Eva," sis, he exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that felt about as genuine as a $3 bill. "How you holding up?" I stepped back, eyeing him warily. "I'm managing." "What are you doing here, Tom?" He sauntered into my apartment like he owned the place, making himself comfortable on my couch. "Well, I heard about Grandma and Grandpa's will. That's quite a windfall you got there, huh?" And there it was. I crossed my arms, already knowing where this was heading. "Look," Eva, Tom said, his voice taking on that wheedling tone I knew all too well. "Sarah and we're still trying to put together our dream wedding, and now that you've come into some money." I cut him off. "No, Tom, I'm not paying for your wedding." His face fell, then hardened. "Come on, Eva. Don't be selfish. It's not like you earned that money. We all know you were just sucking up to them to get their money." The accusation hit me like a slap in the face. "How dare you," I hissed. "I loved them. They were the only ones who ever believed in me." "Yeah, because you played them like a fiddle." Tom was on his feet now, shouting, "Poor little Eva, so neglected. Give me a break. At least I'm not a spoiled brat who thinks the world owes him a fancy wedding." I shot back. We went back and forth, hurling accusations and old grievances at each other. Years of resentment and hurt came pouring out. By the time Tom stormed out, slamming the door behind him, I was shaking with anger and hurt. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, my phone exploded with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Apparently, my parents had been busy. "How could you be so selfish, Eva? Your poor brother just wants a nice wedding. I always knew you were trouble." The messages went on and on. I called my parents, demanding an explanation. "Well, what did you expect?" Mom sniffed. "Refusing to help your own brother. It's shameful." "You didn't want to pay for his ridiculous wedding either," I reminded her. "That's different," Dad chimed in. "We're his parents. You're just being greedy with your inheritance." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Greedy? I worked my ass off in college while you two showered Tom with everything he wanted. "Watch your language, young lady," Mom scolded. "This is exactly why we always preferred Tom. He knows how to behave in polite society." Over the next few weeks, the family divide grew wider. Invitations to family events stopped coming. My cousins unfriended me on social media. It was like I'd been erased from the family tree overnight. At first it hurt. A lot. But as the days went by, I started to feel relieved. No more pretending, no more walking on eggshells, no more feeling like the family disappointment. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor. I had 1 semester left, and I was determined to graduate with honors. My grandparents had believed in me, had given me this amazing gift. I wasn't about to let them down. The day I graduated from college should have been one of the happiest of my life. Instead, I felt empty. There was no one in the audience cheering for me, no proud parents taking photos, no celebratory dinner afterwards. I collected my diploma and went home alone. The next few weeks were a blur of job applications and interviews. I was determined to make something of myself, to prove to everyone, especially myself, that I was worth something. Then, out of the blue, my phone buzzed with a message from Tom. I nearly dropped it in shock. "Hey Eva, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I'm getting married next month. It would mean a lot if you could come. Call me." I stared at the message for a long time before finally hitting the call button. "Eva," Tom's voice was hesitant. "Thanks for calling. Look, I messed up. I've been thinking a lot about how I treated you, how we all treated you. I was a spoiled brat, and I'm sorry." I was stunned into silence. "You're my sister, Eva," he continued. "You and our whole family, you're important to me. I want everyone there for my big day. Please say you'll come." I felt a lump in my throat. I'll think about it," I managed to say before hanging up. The day of the wedding arrived, and I found myself standing outside an elegant hotel, clutching an expensive gift and feeling like I was about to walk into the lion's den. The venue was stunning. Flowers everywhere, crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing softly in the corner. For a moment I felt underdressed in my simple cocktail dress. I spotted Tom across the room, looking dashing in his tuxedo. Taking a deep breath, I made my way over to him. "Congratulations," I said, forcing a smile. Tom's face lit up. "Eva, you came." He pulled me into a hug, and for a moment I let myself believe that everything might be okay. We chatted for a few minutes and I started to relax. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Then I saw them. Mom and Dad making their grand entrance. Mom was dripping in jewelry, Dad in a tux that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. They swept into the room like royalty, greeting guests with air kisses and condescending smiles. "Oh darling, my son's wedding is just divine," I overheard Mom saying to another guest. Of course we spared no expense. Only the best for our Tom. I had to stifle a laugh. Same old Mom and Dad, always putting on a show. As the evening wore on, I did my best to avoid them, sticking to the edges of the room and making small talk with distant relatives who didn't seem to remember our falling out. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way Mom kept glancing at me, the hushed conversations that stopped when I walked by. It was like waiting for the other shoe to drop. The evening was in full swing when Dad clinked his glass, calling for everyone's attention. "It's time for the family toast," he announced, beaming with pride. My stomach dropped. I hadn't prepared anything, but before I could protest, Mom was dragging me towards the stage. I stumbled after my parents, feeling like a lamb being led to slaughter. Dad started the speech, his voice thick with emotion. "Tom, Sarah, we couldn't be prouder. Your love is an inspiration to us all." Mom chimed in. "We've always been a close-knit family, supporting each other through thick and thin." I stood there, trying to keep a neutral expression, wondering what alternate reality they were living in. Then Dad dropped the bomb. "In fact, we love Tom so much that we took out a substantial loan to pay for this beautiful wedding." Wait, what? I thought they'd refuse to pay for the destination wedding. But Dad wasn't finished. "Of course we won't be paying back that loan ourselves. No, our wonderful daughter Eva has generously offered to cover it." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I felt all the blood drain from my face as every eye in the room turned to me. What? I stammered, my voice echoing through the microphone. There must be some mistake. I never agreed to that. Mom's hand clamped down on my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. "Smile and agree, dear," she hissed through clenched teeth. But I was done playing along. I wrenched my arm free and stepped up to the microphone. "I'm sorry, but this is the first I'm hearing about any loan. I never agreed to pay for Tom's wedding." The room erupted into shocked whispers. I saw Tom and Sarah exchanging panicked glances. "Eva, darling," Mom said, her voice sickly sweet as she tried to salvage the situation. "Don't be modest. We all know how generous you are with your inheritance." That was the last straw. Generous? You mean the inheritance you all tried to guilt me out of? The one you said I didn't deserve. Dad tried to grab the microphone, but I held on tight. "I'm sorry, but I won't be paying for this wedding. I wasn't even consulted about it." "You ungrateful little bastard," Dad snarled, forgetting the microphone was still on. His words echoed through the ballroom, causing several guests to gasp. Mom's carefully cultivated mask of politeness crumbled. "We should have thrown you out on the street years ago. You're worthless, you hear me? Worthless." I stood there, shock and hurt warring inside me. Then, a calm settled over me. Without another word, I handed the microphone to the wide-eyed DJ and walked off the stage. As I made my way through the stunned crowd, I heard my parents' voices behind me, alternating between apologies to the guests and more insults hurled at my back. I made it to my car before the tears started. As I drove home, my phone exploded with messages, some supportive, most accusatory. I blocked them all. At home, I double-locked the door and sank to the floor, my mind reeling. Had this all been a setup? Had Tom's apology just been a ploy to get me to pay for his wedding? I felt sick, betrayed, angry, but underneath it all, there was a small spark of relief. The mask had finally come off. There was no more pretending, no more hoping for a family that clearly didn't want me. I woke up the next morning feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My eyes were puffy from crying, and my head pounded with the mother of all headaches. I was contemplating spending the entire day in bed when there was a knock at the door. Peering through the peephole, I was shocked to see Tom standing there, looking as rough as I felt. "Eva, please," he called through the door. "I've been trying to reach you all night. Can we talk?" Part of me wanted to tell him to go to hell, but curiosity won out. I opened the door a crack, eyeing him warily. "What do you want, Tom?" He held up his hands in surrender, to apologize, and explain. "Please, can I come in?" Against my better judgment, I let him in. We sat at my small kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee between us like a peace offering. "I swear to you, Evie, I had no idea about Mom and Dad's plan," Tom began, his voice thick with emotion. "When you stormed out, I confronted them. It was ugly." I snorted. "Yeah, I bet." "No, you don't understand," Tom insisted. "Sarah and I, we never asked them for money. We were paying for the wedding ourselves. This whole loan thing, it was all their idea. They wanted to look good in front of Sarah's family." I felt a weight lift off my chest. "So you didn't set you up?" "God, no, Eva. I meant what I said before the wedding. I want to make things right between us." As Tom talked, I saw a side of him I'd never seen before. He told me about how Sarah had opened his eyes to how dysfunctional our family was, how her parents treated their children with love and respect, not as pawns in some social climbing game. "Sarah's parents are loaded," Tom said with a wry smile. "But you'd never know it. They're the most down-to-earth people I've ever met. When they heard what happened, they offered to pay off Mom and Dad's loan." "What? No, they can't do that," I protested. Tom held up a hand. "Don't worry, I'm going to pay them back, every cent. But they wanted to do this for us, to give us a chance to start fresh without Mom and Dad's drama hanging over our heads." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but for once they weren't tears of frustration or anger. "So what now?" I asked. Tom reached across the table and took my hand. "Now we start over, as a real family. Sarah and I want you in our lives, Eva. No strings attached." We talked for hours, really talked, for what felt like the first time in our lives. By the time Tom left, I felt like I'd gotten my brother back. The next few months were a whirlwind. I landed a job at a marketing firm, throwing myself into work with a passion I never knew I had. Tom and Sarah became regular fixtures in my life, dropping by for dinner or movie nights. One sunny afternoon, Tom and Sarah showed up at my door with matching grins. "We have news," Sarah said, practically bouncing with excitement. "You're going to be an aunt." I squealed and pulled them both into a hug. As we celebrated, I couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. Our parents tried to worm their way back into our lives when they heard about the baby, but Tom and I stood firm. We were done with their manipulation and drama. It wasn't easy, cutting them out, but we had each other now. And sometimes, the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born into. I'm Natalie, 27 years old, and I'm getting married in a few weeks. Right now, I'm sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of wedding invitations. My eyes scan the names, making sure I haven't forgotten anyone important. But there's one name I deliberately left off the list: my stepmother's. I know what you're thinking. How could I not invite my stepmother to my own wedding? Well, it's a long story, and I guess now's as good a time as any to tell it. It all started when I was 5 years old. My parents split up, and my whole world turned upside down. They told me I'd be living with both of them, switching back and forth. At the time, I thought it was great. I loved both my parents and couldn't choose between them. This way, I didn't have to. Life after the divorce wasn't so bad at first. When I was with my dad, we'd go on these amazing road trips. He owned his own business, so he could take time off whenever it was his turn to have me. We'd hop in his car and explore different cities. I remember feeling like a little explorer, discovering new places with my dad by my side. When I was with my mom, things were different but just as good. We'd spend hours playing with my dolls, making up stories for each one, and the smell of fresh-baked cookies often filled the house. Those were happy times. I felt loved, wanted, and cherished by both my parents. But then, things changed. My dad got remarried when I was 7. I remember the day he introduced me to Sarah, my soon-to-be stepmother. She was pretty, with long blonde hair and a smile that seemed to light up the room. At first, things were okay. Sarah was nice to me, and she seemed to genuinely care. She'd help me with my homework when I was at Dad's house and even taught me how to braid my hair. But as time went on, something shifted. Sarah wanted kids of her own, but she couldn't get pregnant. I didn't understand it at the time, but looking back now, I can see how it affected her. Sarah's attitude towards me did a complete 180. Where once she'd been kind and welcoming, now she seemed to resent my very existence. It was like she hated me for being born when she couldn't have children of her own. I didn't understand it then. I was just a kid, wondering what I'd done wrong to make my stepmother suddenly dislike me so much. As time went on, Sarah's attitude towards me only got worse. It was like she'd made a decision if she couldn't have kids of her own, she'd live for herself. And in that life there was no room for me. I started noticing changes when I'd come back from my mom's. Dad and Sarah would be tanned and relaxed, full of stories about trips they'd taken while I was gone. One day, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Dad, why don't we go on trips like we used to?" He looked uncomfortable, glancing at Sarah before answering. "Well, sweetie, things are different now. We have to consider Sarah's schedule too." Sarah cut in, her voice sharp. "Natalie, you're old enough to understand that adults need their own time. Don't be selfish." I felt like I'd been slapped. Selfish? For wanting to spend time with my own father? But it wasn't just the trips. When I was at Dad's house, everything changed. Sarah had new rules for me, and they all seemed designed to keep me out of sight and out of mind. "Natalie," she'd say, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "why don't you go play in your room? Adults are talking." At first, I tried to argue, "But I want to be out here with you and Dad." Sarah's eyes would narrow. "Your father and I need some peace and quiet. Is that too much to ask?" So I'd retreat to my room, feeling more like a prisoner than a daughter in my own father's house. The list of Don T.S. grew longer by the day. Don't make noise. Don't talk loudly. Don't play active games. Don't laugh too loud. It was like living in a library, but worse. One afternoon I was in the living room, laughing at a funny TV show. Sarah stormed in, face red with anger. "What did I tell you about being quiet?" she snapped. "But I was just laughing at." She cut me off. "I don't care what you were laughing at. In this house you follow my rules. Understand?" I nodded, fighting back tears. "Yes, Sarah." "Good," she said, turning to leave. "Now go to your room and stay there until dinner." Dad seemed oblivious to it all. Or maybe he just didn't want to see it. Whenever I tried to talk to him about how Sarah was treating me, he'd brush it off. "She's just adjusting, Natalie," he'd say. "Give her time." But time didn't make things better. It only made Sarah more bold in her dislike of me. She'd criticize everything I did, from how I dressed to how I ate. "Honestly, Natalie, can't you sit up straight and chew with your mouth closed? It's like you were raised in a barn." I wanted to scream, to tell her that I was just a kid, that I was trying my best, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. In Sarah's eyes, my very existence was an offense. So I learned to make myself small, to be quiet, to stay out of the way. I became a ghost in my father's house, tiptoeing around, afraid to make a sound or draw attention to myself. Every 2 weeks, When it was time to go back to Mom's, I felt like I could breathe again. But the dread of returning to Dad's house, to Sarah's cold stares and harsh words, always loomed over me. I managed to keep my emotions bottled up for years, but by the time I turned 12, I couldn't take it anymore. One day, after a particularly nasty encounter with Sarah, I broke down and told Mom everything. Mom listened, her face growing darker with each word. When I finished, she exploded. That thing, she yelled, making me jump. How dare she treat my daughter like this? Before I could stop her, Mom was on the phone with Dad. I've never heard her so angry. Listen here, you spineless excuse for a father, she snarled into the phone. If you don't get your wife under control, I swear I'll take you to court and make sure you never see Natalie again. I felt sick. This wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted things to get better, not worse. A few days later, when I went back to Dad's house, he sat me down for a serious talk. Natalie, he began, his voice stern. We need to discuss your behavior. Sarah has been nothing but good to you. She's trying her best to be a good stepmother, and all you do is complain. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But Dad, she... Enough, he snapped. Do you realize what you've done? Your mother is threatening to take away my visitation rights. Do you want that? Do you want to never see me again? Tears welled up in my eyes. No, of course not. Dad's voice softened a bit. Then you need to stop this, Natalie. No more complaints about Sarah. She only wants what's best for you. If you keep this up, you'll end up tearing this family apart. Is that what you want? I shook my head, unable to speak through my tears. As he left the room, I felt like my world had shattered. Not only had Dad not believed me, but he'd also made me feel like everything was my fault. I was the problem, not Sarah. From that day on, I stopped complaining. I decided to be the perfect stepdaughter, to do everything Sarah wanted, just so I wouldn't lose my dad. I became a shadow in the house, quiet and obedient. I had no say in anything, but at least I still got to see my father, even if he seemed more like a stranger with each passing day. Life at Mom's house was a different story. A few years after the divorce from Dad, Mom met Robert. He was kind, funny, and had a daughter of his own, Lily, who was a year younger than me. Over time, I fell in love with both of them. Robert never tried to replace my dad, but he was always there for me. He'd help me with my homework, listen to my problems, and even taught me how to ride a bike, something Dad had always been too busy to do. Lily became the sister I never knew I wanted. We'd stay up late, giggling and sharing secrets. She never made me feel like an outsider. As I got older, the contrast between my two homes became starker. At Dad's, I was a ghost, trying not to upset the delicate balance. At Mom's, I was Natalie, loud, funny, and loved. As I entered my teenage years, my needs naturally grew. Like any kid my age, I wanted the latest gadgets, a cool smartphone, a decent laptop for schoolwork. Dad, to his credit, seemed to understand this. He'd always been generous, and at first he didn't hesitate to buy me what I needed. I remember the day he handed me my first smartphone. But my joy was short-lived. Sarah's disapproving frown said it all. Later that night, I overheard them arguing. You're spoiling her, Tom, Sarah hissed. Do you have any idea how much that phone cost? She needs it for school, Dad defended weakly. Sarah scoffed. Please. She needs it to post selfies and waste time on social media. You're throwing money away. From that day on, Sarah appointed herself as the family's financial guardian. She told Dad she'd help him save money when it came to my expenses. What this really meant was that she'd take control of everything I got. The next time I needed new clothes, Sarah insisted on handling it herself. What followed was a parade of secondhand clothes and shoes, all bought from discount websites or clearance sales. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against secondhand stuff, but Sarah took it to an extreme. More often than not, the clothes were ill-fitting, out of style, or just plain uncomfortable. But I didn't dare complain. I still remembered Dad's warning about tearing the family apart. The irony of it all, while I was forced to wear hand-me-downs, Sarah never skimped on herself. Her closet was a fashion magazine come-to-life, designer shoes, branded bags, clothes from the latest collections. She'd spend hours preening in front of the mirror, adjusting her perfectly coordinated outfits. Things came to a head when I graduated high school. Dad had promised me a car, nothing fancy, just something to get me around. I was over the moon. Finally, a sign that he still cared, that he saw me as more than just an inconvenience in his new life. But Sarah, true to form, couldn't let it happen. The night before we were supposed to go car shopping, all hell broke loose. A car, Sarah shrieked. "Are you out of your mind, Tom? We can't afford it. Besides, I need a new car. Mine is almost 3 years old." I listened from my room, heart sinking with every word. I knew how this would end. Sure enough, the next morning, Dad came to me with that look on his face, the one that said he was about to disappoint me again. "Natalie, honey," he began, not meeting my eyes. "About the car." I saved him the trouble. "It's okay, Dad. I understand. We can't afford it, right?" He looked relieved that he didn't have to say it himself.
Right.
"But hey, I promise I'll pay for any college you want to go to, and your accommodation too. How's that sound?" I forced a smile. "Sounds great, Dad. Thanks." As he left my room, I heard Sarah's voice from downstairs. "Tom, dear, when are we going to look at that new Jeep I wanted?" So I sat there, in my room full of ill-fitting clothes, clutching my outdated phone, dreaming of a car I'd never get. And I realized something: the material things weren't what hurt the most. It was what they represented. Every second-hand shirt, every denied request, every broken promise was just another way of saying, "You're not worth it, Natalie." When it came time to choose a college, I poured my heart into researching the best options. I finally found one that seemed perfect: great program, beautiful campus, and not too far from home. I was ecstatic when I got accepted. But as soon as Sarah saw the tuition fees, all hell broke loose. "Are you kidding me?" she screeched, face turning red. "This is highway robbery." Dad tried to calm her down. "Now, Sarah, we did promise Natalie." "I don't care what we promised," Sarah interrupted, practically foaming at the mouth. "We are not paying this much for her to party for 4 years." She stormed off and returned with a handful of brochures. Here she thrust them at Dad. "These colleges are much more reasonable, and they're farther away. It'll teach her some independence." And just like that, my dreams were crushed again. I ended up at Sarah's choice of college: cheaper, yes, but also far from everything and everyone I knew. Mom and Robert were thrilled when they heard I was going to college. They didn't know about the behind-the-scenes drama, and I didn't have the heart to tell them. Why burden them with my problems? Despite everything, I threw myself into my studies. I was determined to make the most of this opportunity, even if it wasn't exactly what I'd hoped for. I'd come home for holidays, splitting my time between Mom's welcoming house and Dad's. Well, Dad's house. It was during one of these breaks that everything finally came to a head. Sarah was having a birthday party, and to my surprise, Dad called and asked me to come. "Sarah would love to see you," he said, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I was skeptical, but a small part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, things were changing. So I agreed. I even bought Sarah a gift, a nice scarf I'd saved up for from my part-time job at college. When I arrived at the house, the party was in full swing. I took a deep breath and approached Sarah, gift in hand. "Happy birthday, Sarah," I said, forcing a smile. "I hope you like." I never got to finish. Sarah's face contorted with rage. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. I stammered, confused. "But Dad said you wanted me to come." "Get out," she shrieked. "You're not welcome here. How dare you show up and ruin my party?" I stood there, frozen in shock. The room had gone silent, all eyes on us. Sarah snatched the gift from my hands and, without even looking at it, tossed it in a nearby trash can. "I don't want anything from you. You're not worthy to be here among my friends. Leave. Now." Tears stung my eyes as I turned and fled. I ran up to my old room, grabbing the few belongings I'd left there over the years. As I reached for the front door, I heard Sarah's laughter floating from the living room, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just publicly humiliated her stepdaughter and thrown away a heartfelt gift. I slammed the door behind me and walked away from that house for what I promised myself would be the last time. I went straight to Mom's, where I broke down and finally told her everything, all the years of mistreatment, the manipulation, the broken promises. Mom was furious, but more than that, she was heartbroken for me. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, holding me close. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry you went through all that alone." As I cried in my mother's arms, I felt a weird mix of sadness and relief. Sad for the relationship with my father that I'd probably never have, but relieved to finally be free from Sarah's toxic presence. The day after Sarah's birthday disaster, my phone rang. It was Dad. I almost didn't answer, but a part of me still hoped he'd apologize, that he'd finally see the truth. "Natalie," he said, his voice stern, "why did you leave Sarah's party so abruptly? She was quite upset." My blood boiled. "That's not what happened. She yelled at me in front of everyone and threw my gift in the trash. She kicked me out." There was a pause, then Dad's voice came back, cold and angry. "I can't believe you'd make up such lies about Sarah. Why are you trying to denigrate my wife? Call me when you're ready to apologize to Sarah." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, tears streaming down my face. That was the moment I realized I'd truly lost my father. The next few years were a blur. I threw myself into my studies, graduated college with honors, and landed a decent job. I saw Dad a handful of times, always on neutral ground: a cafe, a park, never at his house. About a year after graduation, I met Jason at work. He was a few years older, kind, funny, and most importantly, he really saw me, not as an inconvenience or a burden, but as a person worthy of love and respect. 4 years flew by. Jason and I moved in together, adopted a cat named Muffin, and built a life filled with love and laughter. Then, on a random Tuesday evening as we were doing dishes after dinner, Jason turned to me and proposed. And just like that, I was engaged. As the initial excitement settled, the reality of wedding planning set in. Which brings us back to where this story began: me, surrounded by wedding invitations, grappling with the question of whether to invite Sarah. In the end, I decided to send an invitation to Dad alone. I couldn't bring myself to include Sarah, not after everything that had happened. As I sealed the envelope, I felt a mix of sadness and resolve. I was starting a new chapter in my life, and I wanted it to be free from the shadows of the past. A week after I sent out the invitations, my phone rang. It was Dad. I answered, expecting the usual awkward small talk. Instead, I got an earful of fury. "How dare you," he bellowed, not even bothering with a hello. "How could you disrespect Sarah like this? You invited me to your wedding, but not her, after everything she's done for you." I couldn't help it. I laughed. A short, bitter laugh that seemed to shock Dad into silence. "Everything she's done for me," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Dad, are you hearing yourself right now?" "She raised you for years," he shot back. "She put so much love and care into." "Love and care," I interrupted, my calm finally snapping. "When, Dad? When did she ever show me love or care? Was it when she made me wear second-hand clothes while she bought designer outfits? Or when she convinced you not to buy me a car for college? Oh, I know it must have been when she threw my birthday gift in the trash and kicked me out of her party." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a quieter voice, Dad said, "Natalie, I'm sure you're exaggerating. Sarah wouldn't." "Wouldn't what, Dad? Wouldn't treat me like crap for years? Wouldn't make me feel unwelcome in my own home? Wouldn't consistently prioritize her own wants over my needs? Because she did all of that and you let her." My voice was shaking now, years of pent-up hurt and anger pouring out. "You never stood up for me, Dad, not once. You always took her side, always believed her over me. Do you have any idea how that felt? To know that your own father would always choose his wife over you?" The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. When Dad finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller somehow. "Natalie, I had no idea. I never meant to. Oh God, what have I done?" I heard a choked sob from his end, and despite everything, my heart clenched. "I'm so sorry, Pumpkin," he continued, his voice thick with tears. "I've been a terrible father. I put Sarah first, I ignored your feelings, I failed you. Can you ever forgive me?" I felt my own eyes welling up. This was all I'd wanted to hear for years, but now that the moment was here, I didn't know how to react. I hesitated, torn between hope and caution. "I'll think about it, Dad. That's all I can promise right now." We ended the call soon after, both emotionally drained. Over the next few weeks, Dad made a real effort. He called regularly, asked about the wedding plans, even offered to help with the costs. Slowly, cautiously, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Then, the day before the wedding, my phone rang again. It was Dad, and my stomach dropped at the sound of his voice. Natalie, his voice hard. "It's Sarah, she had a heart attack. This is your fault. If you hadn't excluded her, if you hadn't stressed her out like this, I can't believe you'd do this to her. I won't be at your celebration. I hope you're happy." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. All the progress, all the hope I'd allowed myself to feel gone in an instant. As I cried in my fiancé's arms, I couldn't help but think, was this really it? Was this how my relationship with my father would end? On the eve of what should be the happiest day of my life. The morning I woke up with a mix of emotions, excitement for the day ahead, but also a lingering sadness about Dad's absence. As I sipped my coffee, trying to focus on the positive, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Sarah's social media page. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on it. What I saw made my blood boil. There was Sarah, looking perfectly healthy, posting dramatic status updates about how hurt she was, how ungrateful I was, how she was recovering from a terrible shock. But in her photos, she was smiling, looking as put together as ever. As I scrolled through the posts, my phone rang. It was Carol, one of Sarah's old friends from the neighborhood. "Natalie, it's Carol. Look, I shouldn't be calling you, but you need to know something. Sarah. She faked the heart attack. I overheard her bragging about it to some friends. She did it to make sure your dad wouldn't come to your wedding. I'm so sorry, honey." I thanked Carol and hung up, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to call Dad immediately to expose Sarah's lies, but then I stopped. What would be the point? He'd made his choice, time and time again. He'd chosen Sarah over me, believed her lies, let her mistreat me for years. This was just the final nail in the coffin. As I got ready for the wedding, surrounded by my mom, my stepsister Lily, and my bridesmaids, I pushed thoughts of Dad and Sarah out of my mind. This was my day, and I refused to let them ruin it. But there was still one problem. "Who's going to walk me down the aisle?" I asked, my voice small. Mom and Lily exchanged glances. Then Mom spoke up, "Honey, Robert would be honored to do it, if you'd like. He loves you like his own daughter, you know." I felt a lump in my throat. Robert, my stepdad, who'd been more of a father to me in many ways than my own dad. Who'd always supported me, always made me feel welcome and loved. "Really?" I asked, looking at Robert. He smiled warmly. "Nothing would make me prouder, Natalie, but only if that's what you want." In that moment, I realized something important. Family isn't just about blood, it's about love, support, and being there for each other. Robert had been that for me, consistently for years. "I'd love that, Robert." "Thank you," I said, giving him a hug. The wedding was beautiful. As Robert walked me down the aisle, I saw Jason waiting for me, his face lit up with love. I saw my mom, Lily, and all our friends and family smiling and crying happy tears. In that moment, I knew I had all the family I needed right here. A few days after the wedding, as Jason and I were preparing to leave for our honeymoon, I decided to post some wedding photos online. Almost immediately, a nasty comment appeared under one of the pictures. "Look at that," Sarah's comment read. "Being walked down the aisle by a stranger while her own father wasn't even invited. Shameful." I stared at the comment, a familiar anger bubbling up inside me. But then I felt Jason's hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Nat?" he asked, concern in his eyes. I looked at my husband, then back at the phone. Suddenly, Sarah's words seemed small, petty, and utterly unimportant. "You know what? I am okay," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "In fact, I'm better than okay." Without another thought, I blocked Sarah's account. Then, After a moment's hesitation, I blocked Dad's too. It was time to close that chapter of my life for good.
"Why aren't you eating dinner?" my father-in-law asked, seeing us for the first time in a long time for New Year's. He must have noticed that there was only enough food at the dining room table for 3. It happens all the time. "What?" My father-in-law looked curiously across the table at